across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, you better believe it. Welcome back. Thank you to Alex, by the way. Welcome to the home of common sense. We've got a shed load of savoury delights coming your way over the next few hours. Chancellor Rachel Reeves has received the backing of the Prime Minister. Of course she has, after she was investigated over expenses at a previous banking job. The plot really thickens. Meanwhile, the party is under fire again over another vile WhatsApp group chat. Is there no beginnings to the dubious nature of these people? And let me ask this question. What do Labour actually stand for? We'll take a look at that in a couple of moments. Also this afternoon, President Zelensky says he can't see a ready US plan to end the war in Ukraine and warns he'll reject any deal done behind his back. This could get really rather messy. Could this be a downgrading of Donald Trump on the international stage? Details on that, and colleagues have begun allowing students on vocational courses to work from home during industry placements to prepare them for real-life hybrid working. You need to practice that? Man alive, what is going on? Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. I really can't phrase this question in any other way. What do the Labour Party stand for? What do Labour stand for? Just think about that question. What are they all about? I mean, the short answer is not a lot. There's no kind of philosophical core to these people. They have reactionary instincts in keeping with most from the left when it comes to how they opine on certain issues. They can tell you what they hate, but they can rarely give you a bullet point list of what they stand for in intelligent terms. What keeps them going is that sense of being right, not just correct in dotting the I's and crossing the T's, but morally right. And there's the problem. Simply calling yourself left-wing is enough to give you that nice warm feeling in the pit of your belly and a guarantee of a good night's sleep. I'm left-wing, therefore I'm a nicer person than you. It genuinely, it really does work like that. That is the engine room of left-wing ideology. As long as you give yourself the name, that's why Blair did so well. Still Labour, so people felt good in that, but they could be sort of secret capitalists. Not so secret capitalists, because they were Labour. They're still the best people. That's how it works. They believe, and of course you would have seen this many, many times, they've got a monopoly on things, like caring for stuff. They genuinely think that only they can define an injustice. But of course, it's all a bit of a bubble. A false, but an illusion, a synthetic idea of what the world looks like through their hugely out-of-focus telescope. The reality is very different. And there's a few examples around just this week, and they really are relevant. I mean, on their own, you could say, well, this stuff could happen to anybody. You put the whole thing together. I'm thinking of the 11 councillors, 2 MPs essentially losing their job because of rabid racism, anti-Semitism and homophobia in that WhatsApp group. They didn't like it because they're lefties, the nice people. They didn't see it like that. Today, we saw evidence of another left-wing WhatsApp group masquerading as the voice of decency. A third Labour MP coming under fire for running a chat which branded veterans and pensioners as Nazis. This is the Education Minister this time. Stephen Morgan, his name is, allegedly the administrator of the group, which featured 143 other members. Some of those members accusing a group of pensioners, veterans and disabled people who took part in an anti-immigration protest in the city's Guildhall Square in Portsmouth last year, accusing them of being Nazis, fascist thugs and terrorists. That's how these left-wing clowns work. That's how they see people who simply disagree with them. What do Labour stand for? And then, of course, let's go to the top tier of government. I mean, I could talk forever about our socialist Prime Minister wandering around in £4,000 worth of suit and £800 glasses, or Angela Rayner living it up on freebie trips to Manhattan, sipping cocktails in a multi-millionaire's penthouse. But it's Rachel Reeves who we need to scrutinise here. Now, we know about her iffy CV. It's hard to separate fact from fiction, where she worked, how long she worked there, in what specific capacity. I'm sure if you looked hard enough at some of her social media, you'd probably find that she worked for Adam Smith, Dr. Bernardo, and maybe helped carry out the world's first heart transplant. I reckon that detail is in the small print. And today we learn she's now up to her neck in it in an alleged expenses swindle. Putting aside that she was actually a supervisor at HBOS in the complaints department while claiming to be a senior economist, we also know that a new investigation into her expenses at the time is now centre stage. And interestingly, and I do think this is interesting, it's the BBC of all outfits that have flagged this one and investigated it. It seems to have done some pretty thorough work too. They say, this is the BBC, a detailed 6-page whistleblowing complaint and dozens of pages of attached evidence which the BBC have seen raised concerns about 3 managers who were using the bank's money to fund a lifestyle with allegedly inappropriate spending on dinners, events, taxes and gifts, including for each other. Wow. Socialist Chancellor Rachel Reeves. A spokesman, I should add, for Reeves said the Chancellor has no knowledge of this investigation, always complied with expenses rules and left the bank on good terms. This is a horrific look. She's literally the custodian of the nation's money. Yet her backstory, on 2 counts at least, would disqualify her from ever getting near a job like Chancellor. Imagine going for the job. Imagine it was an open interview process where you turned up at the Treasury. Hi, I'm here to apply for the job as Chancellor. OK, what do we got here? Got a bit of a dodgy expenses issue went on when you worked in one place. According to the accusation, you were using the bank's money to fund a lavish lifestyle. Inappropriate spending on dinners and gifts, including for your friends. I mean, that alone would disqualify you from doing it, aside from claiming you were an economist when actually you're working as a phone operator in the complaints department. I might be doing her down a tad there, but you take the point. There's enough in there that would go, well, thank you for your interest in this job as Chancellor, but unfortunately, not today. Thank you very much. So you put all of that together. What do Labour stand for? Just think about that. What are they? What philosophically? What is at their core, in their DNA? What are they? This is our government, by the way. We should know. We should be able to say, these are the people that are going to do this. And they've essentially dined out for the last 7 months on the fact they are not the Tories. They are not the Tories. That's as good as it gets. They're not the Tories, so therefore everything's OK. We're Labour, we're good, we're nice people, we care, we hate bullies, we hate injustice. Yeah, and you don't have the overarching monopoly on this stuff. 0344 499 1000. Help us out through this one. What do you think they stand for? Let's get a word on this. And the other big stories of the day, Harrison Allman-Varty, Reform UK councillor, is with us. Good afternoon to you, Harrison. Never knowingly found in any suspicious WhatsApp groups on the council there, I should add, Harrison?
No, I mean, good afternoon. There's a purge going on, isn't there, amongst all these such do-gooders until we find out maybe they're not such do-gooders.
No one likes an extravagant freebie more than a socialist. I mean, I absolutely stand by that.
No, exactly. And socialism is great until you run out of other people's money.
Yeah.
Said by Margaret Thatcher, which is absolutely bang on. So yeah, I actually think it's quite funny that the social warriors of what's right and wrong this time last year are now getting caught out by their own rules. I mean, not even very tight rules. I mean, some of the stuff that you think, oh, yikes. I mean, I could just imagine that if this was the Conservatives, and especially if it was Reform, it would be way, 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 way worse. So I think I think the way that they acted in opposition made themselves as these kind of, well, it was how they sold themselves in the general election, actually, wasn't it? It was, aren't you so tired of this and of that, and trying to get the grown-ups in charge, and how it was all a bit patronising, and I thought, okay, yes, let's do that then. And then it turns out, if not worse. So, yeah, I think, do you know what? Someone said to me the other day that Prime Minister's Question Times is the biggest advert for reform at the moment, because it's just those two just going at each other and exposing how rubbish they are. And yeah, I think they'll just end up just self-imploding.
Well, you're right. And certainly PMQs is a really good example of how bad things are. I mean, it's a fairly banal display of, you know, this kind of almost fake arguments and disagreements that they're not that interesting. They haven't picked the best. And then when that's all over, Rupert Lowe on the Reform side stands up with an absolute banger of a question, or Nigel Farage does, and the entire House is dominated by that. And this is a party that only has 5 MPs, punching well above its weight and asking the kind of questions that most people seem to be interested in. Even if you don't like Reform UK, even if you'd never vote for them, nobody could argue with that analysis.
It just shows how hard it is to be a small party within Parliament, because you could literally say the best thing in the world, but that you will be drowned out by laughters and heckles. And
100%.
In fairness, that's the nature of the game, and Reform, know that. One thing that I think personally, Kemi Badenoch's PMQs this week was probably her worst, in my opinion.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. There was a massive own goal there, wasn't that good?
It was excruciating, and it must take a lot to make Keir Starmer look good, but I'll hand it to him. He won that one.
Well, indeed, when you try to scupper the Prime Minister with a question, but he comes back and agrees with you and says he's going to sort it, then fair dues. I don't believe he was responsible for the loophole. And then she came back 2 more times with the same question.
Absolutely. Do you know what? I actually think it made him look quite good. And look, I used to be, obviously, as you know, a former Conservative, but it was dreadful, because what was happening was she had a question and she was expecting him to say no, X, Y, Z, kind of like what politicians do. So then she was going to go and had a script to say, well, you've denied it, and then well, you denied it. But in fairness to him, he stood up and said, you're absolutely right. Thanks for flagging it. I'll look into it. Yeah. At that point, she must have thought,
I haven't got a spare in the bag.
Yeah,
what am I going to do on this?
So I'll keep going with it. And it was so embarrassing. And I could see, and I do rate Rob Jenrick. And you could see him looking at her, and he must have been thinking, oh my. I think
he was also thinking, this job will still be mine.
Yeah, I mean, some people say that she'll be in charge up until the general election. I think if that is the case,
I would be staggered.
Yeah,
I would be staggered. I really thought she was going to do the business, but I fear it's just not her thing. It's not her gift. It's not her. It's just she's not that person. She's a great cabinet minister, and she can speak and argue well from that position, but I don't sense that she's the leader.
No way. I mean, there's also no chance that they've got as many members as they're saying. I mean, they're claiming, the last figure we knew was, 131,000, and that was during a leadership election, and they actually gave a window for people to buy a Tory membership to vote in that. So that number's kind of artificially inflated anyway, because people wanted to have a say. Since then, lots of people would have cancelled their memberships. There's also rumours about people getting ballots of people who cancelled their membership ages ago. I emailed saying I want to withdraw my membership a while ago, and they'd still charge me. They still send me emails. I still get the Conservative count.
They don't want to let a young buck like you go, Harrison.
But I'm telling you, I reckon their membership's under 100,000.
No, I think it probably is. Let's
bullish on that.
Yep. Let's bring it back to Rachel Reeves, though. So she's under fire again. Allegations over misusing company expenses, mishandling budgets in her corporate career before becoming an MP. Let's have a listen to Rachel Reeves. This is her speaking to ITV about the dodgy CV allegations. Here it is.
Why did you say that you'd worked at the Bank of England for a decade when, in fact, it wasn't even 6 years, it was 5? I mean, that's exaggeration, isn't it?
Well, I worked at the Bank of England for 6 years, between 2000 and 2006. I was employed by the Bank of England, including I spent just over a year at the British Embassy working in the economics section there, supporting the government and the bank.
Why did you say it was a decade?
Well, I think you're taking... it's one interview. I worked at the Bank of England for 6 years. I worked for then at Halifax Bank of Scotland, I think, for 3 years after that. I became an MP when I was 31. But I think in the end, people want to judge me on the job that I'm doing today as Chancellor of the Exchequer. I'm qualified to do this job. But in the end, people are going to judge me. Am I growing the economy? Am I improving their living standards? And I'm determined to do just that.
Yeah, the answer's no, by the way, to all of those questions. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's a mumbling, stumbling response to a fair question. If it was your mate down the pub who'd embroidered his or her CV to get a job, you know, you'd buy them a pint and pat them on the back and say, yeah, it's a little bit of licence you use, unless they were suggesting that they were a qualified doctor or something when, you know, they weren't even a qualified bricklayer. But generally speaking, it wouldn't really matter. When it's your Chancellor, integrity matters, even if you haven't specifically broken the law. I mean, the expenses thing would be an internal company thing. It's not a criminal matter. It's about integrity, right? It's about whether you look at that person and say, this is somebody I could trust.
You know, when I listen to her, one word comes to mind, and that's confidence. I don't know about you. I mean, she fills me with loads of confidence. I mean, do you know? I think you're absolutely right. I think she clearly has. She clearly has like this, you know. I mean, the fact that the BBC are going after her just shows to the extent of how bad this is. And I also think that regarding the whole expense thing, this just shows the craziness of it in the sense that left-wing papers like The Mirror will go after people like Nigel Farage and call him 9 jobs Nige because he earns so much money, and in return he won't claim expenses. Yet we won't have any kind of. I would personally rather someone that, you know, does some bits on the side so they don't have to claim expenses, rather than have someone who's completely reliant and kind of taking the mickey with it all, really. I'll be honest, I think, and maybe this is a bit premature to say this, but I think her days are numbered. I think it'll be quite unlikely to see her run out to the end of the year, because the only thing that can save her is results. Now, if she says all this, and let's just say, okay, the CV thing, that could all be overcast, really, by a good set of results. In this case of not only is our GDP going up, but GDP per capita is also taking a turn, and people are getting richer. Now, that's obviously not the case, and obviously on Question Time, they were saying about, oh yes, but they revised the figures and we got growth. 0.1%. I mean, is this what we're really going after now? Yeah. So I think
well, I was just going to add, you know, and based on their own logic, because everything was the Tories' fault, that growth would surely have to be because of the Conservatives, because everything that's happened so far is because of the Conservatives. So they can't have it both ways. Harrison, stay with us. We're going to take a brief pause. We're back with more from Harrison Allman-Varty, Reform UK councillor. And I'm also going to tell you, by the way, just to add to the strange story of UK Labour, do you know there's only one member of the evangelists that are preaching at the altar of net zero, only one of them has a heat pump. I'll tell you who that is on the other side of this break. This is Talk.
I'm hearing from various different people. I don't know whether this is what you're hearing, that the promised sort of Armageddon, if you like, from Donald Trump and also from Benjamin Netanyahu might not occur because it would appear, hopefully, that Hamas has agreed to release some hostages.
Yes, Mike, I think that's right. I think that this Saturday, once again, we'll see 3 hostages released. We're hearing more and more stories about the torture and the horrible conditions which Hamas, the terrorist group, is subjecting the other hostages to, the ones that remain.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
23 minutes after 1 o'clock here on Talk. We're looking at the big stories of the day. Harrison Allman-Varty, Reform UK councillor, one of the youngest councillors on planet Earth. Did you know that? What are you now, Harrison? Like 14 or something?
Not bad. It's not a bad title, that is it? Well, it's not a pickup line, but I'll take it from you.
Yeah, indeed.
I'm actually 21. But it's interesting because every time I see something report on me, my age moves all over the place. I actually don't know how old I am anymore.
Yeah, no, that's good. Keep it like that forever, because there'll be a time when that's rather useful to you.
Yeah.
Let's just have a quick look at this, because we've got a lot of stories to try and get through here. Furious MPs accusing Trump of World War II-style appeasement, criticising him for urging Ukraine to make peace with Russia. Let's have a listen to Mr. Trump's remarks here and why it's become controversial.
Do you view Ukraine as an equal member of this peace process?
It's an interesting question. I think they have to make peace. Their people are being killed, and I think they have to make peace.
We will continue to be
I said that was not a good war to go into, and I think they have to make peace. That's what I think.
What do we make of that, Harrison, specifically? He clearly dodged the answer, and one would assume, you would extrapolate from that he doesn't include Ukraine as an equal part. I think he since rode back on that comment, by the way, and clarified that they would be, or something like that.
Yeah, when I heard him later, when he kind of did that free-flowing exchange with journalists, he made it clear that he would loop Ukraine into discussions. And I think that's key. And I think he'd actually be a very good mediator between the two. I actually fundamentally believe that he does want peace. His track record has actually been, pretty consistent with that. He was a big vocal opponent of the Iraq War, and it's very interesting to see. I don't really know what the outcome of people what they're looking for. The likes of Boris Johnson. He has, for example, taken a very leading role on this on the global stage. Probably thanks to Brexit, you kind of come across a bit better on the world stage. However, in caveat that I'm not really sure what his outcome would be. I don't really know. It's really tricky, this, because there is no real right answer in that sense. However, there also is a sense of we have to be realistic in the sense that Trump, the United States has been bankrolling Ukraine, and they hold a lot of cards in this. So, the US does have a very big say on this, because they are fundamental into whether, Ukraine can continue or not. This is a really tricky one because wars either end, with one country being destroyed completely or not. And I think personally, if they can reach an agreement with all three of them sat in the room, that can be, nothing but a good thing, in my opinion.
Just a quick one on this. Turns out that despite the Labour government banging on about heat pumps and solar panels and Lord knows what you're meant to put on the roof of your house, only one cabinet minister has a heat pump. This is clearly a disgrace and a breach of some international convention somewhere. That one person is Ed Miliband. To be fair, he's true to his words on that. He's got a heat pump. Rayner doesn't know what one is. David Lammy wouldn't look at one if you threw it in front of him. And Keir Starmer would, I don't know, do what? And Rachel Reeves would try and claim expenses on it, I'm sure. But he's the only one that has one. What a disgrace.
Yeah, that famous no-brainer Angela Rayner. Do you know, the worst one out of them all was when it was in the general election campaign, and a journalist asked Carla Denyer, who heads up the Green Party, whether she's got a Green Party. She went, "I'm currently getting quotes." What? What a stupid answer. So you don't have one, basically.
Yes, the answer is no.
So don't, do as I say, not as I do. And, anybody who is familiar with the planning system or to build a home in the last few months has realised that it's basically a requirement now. So it's just ludicrous. I mean, I'm surprised even Ed Miliband's got one, to be honest.
I'm surprised. They're quite hard to fit in most places.
With him having it, he'll realise how stupid they are.
Yeah, it's not heating the house like it was, like it said on the back of the packet.
No, I mean, I hope, if he's probably realised on those nights when it's -5 outside that it's absolutely freezing in his house. Because anybody that knows anything about heat pumps is they work extremely well if the temperature you want is the temperature outside. Yeah. Because if not, then they have to draw down on extreme amounts of energy to match that temperature. So yeah, very good if you've got a pool in the summer where it's already warm outside, but apart from that, it's a bit tricky.
And you end up putting a fan heater on. And also this, colleges are now allowing T-level students to work from home during placements to reflect real-life hybrid working. Despite concerns, it undermines hands-on experience. I mean, this is rather extraordinary. Let's have a listen to Angela Rayner. This is her talking a little while back now, discussing Labour's plans to encourage more people to not go to work.
I've talked about the future of work as a Labour policy going forward, that I hope that employers can be more flexible with the way employees work, because we've seen that through the pandemic they can do. And it's actually good for work-life balance as well. So we encourage people to be able to work from home where that's a possibility.
So there it is. Not only encourage it, they're also training it now. Apparently you need to be trained on how to not go to work, Harrison.
Can't be good for the economy, can it? I mean, it really can't be good to have going from one area where you have to go to a restaurant, stimulate the local economy, to just staying at home. Also, can't be good for your mental health. I used to work for a bank where my contract was permanent work from home. And I didn't last that long because anybody will know when you're not submerged in a kind of work environment and meeting colleagues, it's incredibly depressing. So I completely go against this. And I think, you want to know why so many young people, have mental health things, for example, at university. It's because they just don't go out. They stay in their rooms. People need to go out. And often it's the case that some need a push to go out. And if that's work, then I think that's a good thing.
I mean, a crash course in socialising, being with fellow human beings, doing work together, working as a team, getting stuff done in that environment. I mean, the last time I looked, that's all pretty beneficial stuff. Let's move on to this straightforward question, Harrison. Have you ever been eaten by a humpback whale?
I don't think so.
Well, you're rubbish to answer this question, then, because this is the kayaker Adrian Simancas, who thought he was going to die when he was out there on his kayak. There he is, paddling along like a beauty. Big humpback whale comes out the water and eats him. Swallows the poor kayaker. Straight down the old esophagus it goes. However, God was clearly shining a light that day, because just like some bizarre Pinocchio-like stroke of luck, the humpback whale sneezes or coughs and out pops the kayaker. Bang.
I mean, what type of person would want to go on look at it out there. Grey skies, and look at the sea. I mean, do you know what? I mean, seriously, who in their right mind would want to go kayaking in that anyway?
Folk do strange stuff like that. We were talking about this earlier. There's people all over the world that do this.
I think that.
Adam, our producer, who's Australian, was saying, in the Northern Territories, every now and again, somebody will, suggest taking their kids fishing in a croc-infested swamp. And then you think after, what were you thinking when you took your child there shortly before he was masticated by a toothy crocodile? It's like it doesn't take much to realise the risk factor is pretty darn huge.
I think that whale's done more parenting in that 5-second clip than clearly his dad has ever, because on a rainy day, normally you go, oh, why don't we go to the cinema, not let's go out into the ocean and see how far we can go out. Because I know I read into the story a bit further, and he was worried he was going to get hypothermia, so it was obviously freezing out there as well. Sounds like an absolute nightmare way to spend my Sunday.
Indeed. The humpback whale will be appearing on the Andre Walker show over the weekend, apparently, here on Talk, so we'll watch with interest. Listen, Harrison, thank you. Harrison Allman-Varty, Reform UK councillor. Have a cracking weekend, Harrison. More from you on the way. 0344 499 1000. We're asking a straightforward question. I'm very interested to know if there's a straightforward answer to this. I'm not absolutely sure there is. But what do Labour actually stand for? And it's not a tongue-in-cheek thing. I'm genuinely looking at the kind of the things we are seeing. I'm putting stories together, and I'm just, what is the fabric? What's the beating heart, the core, the DNA, the inner workings, the mechanics of the Labour? What are they? Who are they? What do they represent when you think about it? 0344 499 1000. We'll chat to Dan Hodges on this in a couple of moments. Also, Sir John Redwood, former Conservative Cabinet Minister, is going to join us as well. Our lines are open. Just gone 1:30. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 25 to 2. Lots to get through on the programme today, including this question. When I asked what does the Labour Party actually stand for, Debbie says, Labour stands for me, myself and I. Maybe it does. It's just very hard to kind of focus and drill down and go, OK, this is what they're all about. And I look at those WhatsApp groups, and I know on its own that's not the biggest story. It's certainly crucial that two ministers, or just certainly two politicians, one minister, have been forced to sort of walk the plank, whip removed, etc. Maybe another one will follow. Everything that's going on with Rachel Reeves. She's received the backing of the Prime Minister despite everything after she was investigated over expenses at a previous banking job. I happen to think this is a terrible look for a Chancellor. It's about integrity, right? This included allegedly spending hundreds of pounds on handbags, perfumes, earrings and wine for colleagues, including one gift for her boss. It comes as the Labour Party is also under fire for another vile WhatsApp chat which branded veterans and pensioners as Nazis and featured an AI photo of Rishi Sunak being deported to Rwanda. That's a little bit iffy too. Let's get a word. Sir John Redwood joins us in just a moment. Dan Hodges, commentator, Mail on Sunday afternoon. To you, Dan. I mean, talk about the gift that keeps on giving, if that's the way we have to look at it. We're no shortage of material around the Labour Party, and it's difficult to know who they are, frankly. What are they? What's their purpose? What are they all about? What do they stand for?
Well, I think there's a very, firstly, it's a very good question, and the simple answer is we don't know, and there's a very good reason for that. Obviously, in the run-up to the election, in the years in the run-up to the election, Keir Starmer's strategy and the Labour Party strategy was to win that election not by showing the British people who they were and what they wanted to do, but by showing the British people who they weren't. So if you remember, Keir Starmer's initial strategy was simply to show the British people he wasn't Jeremy Corbyn.
Yep.
And then when he was finally assured that he'd managed to convince them of that, he then just went around trying to assure them he wasn't the Conservative Party. And, you know, in fair play, that strategy proved successful. But the problem is that, as it were, what was called the Ming Vase strategy of just being very careful to just get into power and not do anything that could risk losing the election, that meant that the work of preparing for government hadn't been properly done. And we are now all seeing the effects across the gamut of government of ministers who are desperately now sort of scrabbling to more or less make it up as they go along and get to grips with government as they go along, with all the attendant problems that we can see.
And how big are those problems, Dan? I'm looking at the Rachel Reeves story, and again, it's very difficult. This is the BBC, who, I know we can bang on about the BBC and criticise them all over the place for lots of things, but they would usually get these things legaled, as they say it. So they've been allowed to publish this. They believe there's sufficient evidence that it's beyond a bit of speculation. I think there's something rather serious in this, and it's not about whether there's criminality, but it is about integrity.
Yeah, I've got to be honest. I don't agree with you on this one. I'll tell you what. As you said, the only source we've got for this is the BBC. They seem to be the only people who've done an independent investigation into this. I really don't understand what Rachel Reeves is supposed to have done wrong here. Now, an allegation was made, it seems, by a so-called whistleblower. The allegation, you touched on it. It seems to me that she was using she and other managers were using a company credit card to buy gifts, not for themselves, but for members of their staff as rewards, maybe as Christmas gifts. And that seems to be it. And, as you said, there's no criminality involved here. There is no... So the only suggestion would be, did she in some way break the rules of the place she was working? The BBC said there was an investigation, but it didn't conclude that she'd broken the rules. So I'm not entirely sure
I think
the issue is, to be perfectly honest.
Depending on which end of the telescope you look at this one. I agree that it's not, this is not the greatest, it's not Watergate, for goodness sake, and it's certainly not a criminal act. It's an internal issue for a bank, and I understand that. Apparently the deal is that it was to fund, this is the quote that was given to the BBC, to fund a lifestyle with allegedly inappropriate spending on dinners, events, taxes and gifts, including for each other. So you've gone outside maybe the internal rule book. Look, if you were applying for a job as a Chancellor and that came up, then it might preclude you from becoming Chancellor. I think that's broadly my point, along with, a bit of an iffy CV as to whether you were actually a senior economist or somebody who worked in the complaints department.
But on that point, I haven't seen this. What you said, that she was supposedly this lavish lifestyle on gifts for each other. What gifts is Rachel Reeves supposed to have taken here?
Well, she's denied there being any knowledge of an investigation into this, and the missing part of the jigsaw for the BBC is they can't find a conclusion to it.
Exactly, but as I said, are you aware of what gifts Rachel Reeves is personally supposed to have accepted here?
Only the whistleblower. The whistleblower has been quite generic in saying lifestyle, dinners, events, taxes, and gifts. Now, what is a gift? I don't know. Is it a Rolex watch? Is it a jamboree bag or a sherbet dip?
Exactly, that's the point. And the point is, as you've said, the only way this story bottoms out is if somebody can demonstrate, that Rachel Reeves broke the bank's internal rules in relation to expenses.
Yeah.
And the BBC themselves have said they couldn't. So now it may well be someone else. But unless the bank itself at the time said, we have investigated, we've been through our internal procedures, we have concluded and confirmed that you, Rachel Reeves, have been guilty of breaking our rules, then she has a case to answer. But that isn't what's happened in this case. So I genuinely don't see, in a sense, how it is supposed to bottom out.
I guess to many people, the fact that the BBC have done this would suggest they feel they've got sufficient something or other to stand it up. But perhaps the wider picture, though, Dan, is that it sits alongside other elements of her past, the CV, which is demonstrably questionable, which again I think would probably preclude you from getting the job if you had to interview with 20 other people. You might not get it if you said you'd worked somewhere for 10 years when it was only 5 years, and in one example you weren't even an economist at all, you were actually working in the complaints department. I mean, that is surely grounds for at least concern.
Yes, but again, that's a different issue. I mean, there obviously are discrepancies in Rachel Reeves' CV. I don't think any of them, of themselves, though, would necessarily preclude her.
So you think she can survive? You think she'll survive these bits?
Well, she can survive she can survive these. The fundamental problem, though, that Rachel Reeves has got, in my view, is not these issues. It's what actually Rachel Reeves is doing with the economy. And the fact, two things. Firstly, obviously, the economy is in the state that we all know it's in, and that is obviously very serious for her. But also, she, in my view, and Keir Starmer have made an absolutely appalling, fundamental political strategic blunder. Because if you remember, at the time of the budget, they told us this budget is about protecting public services, investing in public services, safeguarding public services. That's why we elected. 2 or 3 weeks ago, they suddenly threw all that out the window and said, no, our economic strategy is solely or almost exclusively designed and aimed at generating growth. So that is the prism through which we have to judge whether or not their policies are a success. Now, as we've seen, the very best we can see is stuttering anemic growth. And I think we're about to see figures which show growth is actually, if not collapsing, is certainly subsiding. So on their own metric, their own economic strategy isn't working. And that's what the real fundamental problem for Rachel Reeves is, not expenses or CVs.
OK. Dan, thank you as ever. Dan Hodges, commentator at the Mail on Sunday. Let's speak with Sir John Redwood, former Conservative Cabinet Minister. John, good afternoon to you. Thank you for hanging on. I mean, the fundamental question we put out at the beginning of this is what do Labour actually stand for? When I look back at politics, the time that I became interested in what was happening in politics, you were in government, Mrs Thatcher had just gone, but I kind of knew what it was. I knew what the Conservative Party was. I knew absolutely what they stood for. And in fairness to somebody like Jeremy Corbyn, I absolutely know what he stands for. I always thought Mr Corbyn was a good exercise in democracy. You know, it did what it said on the tin. He wasn't hiding any of that stuff. Fair play to him. Horror show to think he might have become Prime Minister, but that's another issue. Nonetheless, today's Labour government, you're a seasoned politician. When you look at them, even as the opposition, what do you see in Labour? What do you think they stand for?
Well, I think it's deeply disappointing. I mean, they posed as very prudent people who were going to play by the rules and not have all these problems with their ministers and their behaviour. And once they get into office, we see there are very many behavioural issues, and they've lost 3 ministers already over behavioural questions. And we now have this row over the past of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, when she's meant to be a figure of stability and someone you can rely on. But I agree with the last analysis. I think you don't have to land the charges about her past conduct to say that this Chancellor is thoroughly unsuited to the job and is visibly failing in it. One of the issues raised by her past experience is, can you trust her with other people's money? Well, we know for sure now we can't trust her with our taxpayers' money. Why on earth hasn't she immediately said to the Prime Minister, given the state of our budgets, we don't have 9 billion to give away to Mauritius when there is no legal basis for having to give such money? Why hasn't she investigated the 30 billion of losses in the 9 months to December wrapped up by the Bank of England, which have all had to be reimbursed by the taxpayer and by the Treasury? Surely anyone who was on the ball in that job would have had words with the governor of the Bank of England and said, why don't you control those losses in the way that the European Central Bank is controlling similar potential losses they've got? We know that her budget bombed, and far from being a budget for growth, it confirmed the damage she'd done in the run-up to the budget by terrifying everybody and threatening everybody with tax rises. And if you want to know about her economics, I've never questioned the fact that she got a first degree from Oxford, which included economics papers, and she went on to study more economics at the LSE. So at good institutions, she was taught some economics. But when you see the budget, she obviously hadn't learned the lessons. I mean, number one lesson when I did A-level economics was that if you put the price of something up, people buy less of it. So her budget, which was all about growth and more jobs, puts up the price of employing people by a very noticeable amount for the low-paid jobs. And then she looks surprised when vacancies plunge and unemployment goes up. You know, please, Rachel, remember what you were taught in those economics lessons.
Indeed. And how important, I mean, look, there is such, I know there's such a thing as tittle-tattle, and we've all seen good people have to walk the plank because of a kind of a pylon, if you like, from, you know, certain sectors of the media, where it becomes, the perception becomes the reality, and I have sympathy when that happens. You know, if you're caught having an affair and you're married, you've usually got to go, unless you're in France where you get promoted because it's almost compulsory. So just different rules in different countries, I get that. But there is such a thing as, you know, integrity, isn't there? I look back at Rachel Reeves, and I'm sure, you know, if she had an expense account as a senior manager somewhere, and once in a while she bought somebody a gift to show, you know, well, you've been a good team member, here's the gift, and it might have just fallen slightly outside the internal rules. Ordinarily, I wouldn't care about that. But I think sometimes you do put a picture together of somebody when you look at the CV and how long she did or didn't work in certain places, this expense thing, and you sort of build up a picture of whether this person is really the kind of suitable type for a job like Chancellor. I think that's reasonable to at least look at that.
Well, I think in this case it is, and I can understand why the press is pursuing it, because most ministers, when they get put into jobs that they don't know very much about, they don't invent a CV to say, I'm the perfect person for this job. That people accept that they are generalists, and they've got there because they're good politicians, and they have plenty of advice from the system. But this woman, before the election and after, told us all that she was this really experienced and good economist who'd work at the Bank of England. So, of course, it becomes a matter of interest how accurate that claim is. I've chosen myself to concentrate on the obvious signs that her economics as Chancellor are very bad, and she's taking the wrong kind of advice. But if we look at the actual facts, because this is obviously dangerous legal territory, we do know for a fact that twice her LinkedIn pages have been changed to reduce the amount of time she claims to have been working as an economist at the Bank of England, to change the nature of her employment, I think, and its timing at HBOS. And I believe the defence she's put forward is these past mistakes made by staff. Well, then I think you have to say, surely most MPs and ministers think their LinkedIn account is their personal account, and they therefore have to do it themselves. Who are these staff who were running her LinkedIn account, and who was paying their salaries? And if that was all fine to have a staff member doing it, why didn't she take the trouble to make sure the staff member actually knew the truth, rather than allowing inaccurate entries to appear and not having any curiosity herself to find out that the site was inaccurate?
Indeed. I'd find it hard to believe she didn't know what was on there either. Listen, John, we hit the clock, but thank you as ever. It's an expert view from Sir John Redwood, former Cabinet Minister, with us here on the programme. I know there will be screaming, sizzling lefties who are discombobulating at the idea that someone is trying to... It's a stitch-up. They'll be arguing it's a stitch-up from the BBC. The BBC are a biased organisation. They've always favoured the Tory party. And people on the right will be going, you what, mate? You say what? Favoured the Tory... Again, that strange confirmation bias thing kicks in. But I think the B probably wouldn't have gone there on something that isn't the greatest political scandal of our times. It's hardly Christine Keeler and Profumo. And again, it's not Watergate. But it does kind of build up a bit of a picture of someone. What type of person do we have as a Chancellor? Did somebody break those rules? The Treasury spokesman for Reeves has said the Chancellor's got no knowledge of an investigation and always complied with expenses rules and left the bank on good terms. And that might turn out to be the case. I think what's intriguing to me is, of all places that decided to unearth this and run the story, and they've got a big piece on it on their website, it's one of those sort of special features, if you like. I can't imagine they'd have done that without any way of standing it up. They would have to be confident that they could stand there in front of just about any legal brain. And they have been careful in the way they've worded things, and I hope I've been careful in reflecting it. Don't want to end up in the dock facing Rachel Reeves. I mean, that in itself would be a sentence, wouldn't it? 0344 499 1000. You can comment on that specifically, because you may have another angle. Dan Hodges didn't think there was really anything to see on that aspect of the story. The wider question about what do Labour stand for, and when I look at what has happened since they've been in power, I'm intrigued about the kind of person. I've always been fascinated by what makes up. I know what I can easily identify what makes up a right-wing thinker. What makes up a left-wing thinker is a far trickier question. It's far more complex and nuanced. And it often boils down to somebody who is left-wing because they think it makes them a nicer person. I can't really get beyond that. But actually the evidence, and we've seen this with Starmer and Rayner, we've seen it with Rachel Reeves, we've seen it with these councillors and WhatsApp groups, is that underneath it all, this veneer of godliness, this veneer of being morally superior, usurping any other position by dint of your left-wing credentials, it just falls apart under the most basic bit of scrutiny. Our lines are open. This is Talk.
She claimed, and I'm talking about Rachel Reeves, something approaching £750,000 over 3 years. It's an awful lot of money. And you just think to yourself, you know, how much of that now should we be looking at?
I think it's time to look again at everything. I found that when I was an MP, obviously because I got elected on the issue of public trust in public life, I'd be above reproach to myself. So you look at your records.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Let's go to your calls. Georgina, down in London. What have you got for us, Georgina? Hi.
Good afternoon, Ian. Well, it's all going on, isn't it?
It's all going on.
The Labour Party doesn't know what it stands for anymore. Keir Starmer is trying to be a man for all seasons, and he has ended up thrusting the UK into a winter of discontent. Rachel Reeves wouldn't be given a job in your local corner shop if she'd have been truthful about her CV, and she is now the Chancellor of the Exchequer. What is going on?
Yeah.
They always say we have no knowledge of this, or we haven't got information on this. If they're backed into a tight corner and they don't want to ask a question, they won't even give a direct yes or no on the most basic of questions. You can't be all things to all men in politics. It's an impossibility. The lies being told are totally relentless. Totally relentless. You know,
but these are meant to, Georgina, these are meant to be the people that don't do this kind of stuff. I think that is the problem here, isn't it? It's about integrity and credibility. And they were the antidote to the wicked Tories who, when they weren't being criminally minded or vacuous in terms of morality, they were, uncaring about just about everything on the planet. These were the guys that were going to step in and address all of that.
Well, they haven't addressed anything that the British public needed to be addressing. We need an antidote from the Labour Party. That's what we need. Hopefully Nigel Farage will come in and try and sort this mess out. They are not doing anything that they need to be doing. It's just an absolute nightmare. They have become masters in the art of deflection where questions are concerned. They go, you ask them a direct question, they deflect it and go on to something totally different. Taxpayers are being bled dry. We can't cope with this much more. We can't do it. We can't have more people coming into the UK who the taxpayer has got to pay for. We can't do it anymore.
And they're just realising that they've got to respond to that somehow, because again, it's not in their DNA ordinarily to give a hoot about this stuff. Georgina, I've got to move just because of time. Amanda says the only way to describe the Labour Party is wolves in sheep's clothing or first-class hypocrites. Elle says anybody else would be sacked for lying. Brad in Cambridge, interesting one, says it does make me wonder whether this is a BBC smokescreen. This is the investigation into Rachel Reeves' expenses in her old job. This could both exonerate Reeves and let the BBC say that they're not biased after all. I mean, there'd be a lot resting on them doing that. But yeah, it's certainly an interesting point, isn't it? Could it exonerate Reeves? Look, it was a stitch-up by the media. And the BBC of all people. 0344 499 1000. Lots to get through in the next section. So many great stories to come this way. More comment coming in from you. First, though, let's get the headlines at 2 o'clock.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Coming up on 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. Welcome back to the home of common sense. We're talking about Chancellor Rachel Reeves receiving backing of the Prime Minister despite a bit of an investigation over her expenses at a previous banking job, not to mention the turmoil over her rather curious jump around CV. The party, of course, is also under fire over another vile WhatsApp chat group. Man alive, what is going on over there? What do Labour actually stand for? More comment from you on the way. Also, speaking of Labour, their war on landlords has triggered a record wave of eviction claims as buy-to-let owners race to reclaim their properties ahead of looming rent reforms. I mean, a kid could have told them this might happen. This is nuts and sledgehammers from the Labour government. And also this, more than half the population believes Britain's welfare rules are too lax, according to a new poll, as voters urge the government to crack down on benefits. It's the ongoing conundrum. Every shade of government experiences that one. What is the best way through? Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. This comes in from Neil Stoke-on-Trent. I feel sorry for Nigel Farage and the Reform Party if they get elected next time, if they have to sort out the mess this government is causing. It's a fair point. Ian, what did Rachel Reeves do in the now missing 4.5 years? It's a very good point, actually. It was 10 years, went down to 5.5 years. I think one of those years she was doing some kind of degree somewhere. Richard says, it may not be against the rules at HBOS, but I would certainly not want a Chancellor to be using his or her Treasury credit card to buy expensive presents and meals for her work friends with my hard-earned money. Well, unfortunately, politicians have got a PhD in spending taxpayers' money on a bit of a Beano here and a soiree there. They love a vol au vent and a glass of champagne. Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. Chloe Dobbs, political commentator, is back with us. Chloe, afternoon to you. I mean, Rachel Reeves is, I would say she's up to her neck in it. I know different commentators have different views on this. Dan Hodges, we spoke to in the last hour, was a little bit relaxed about this expenses thing, thought there's probably not much in it. I agree it's not criminality. It sounds like an internal issue. I think there's an integrity question over that. But there is now a sort of an overarching growing perception that Rachel Reeves is not only out of her depth currently as the Chancellor, but her backstory doesn't stack up, which again feeds into that issue of distrust.
I think you're right, Ian, that there is definitely an integrity question here. If this story was just standalone, maybe it wouldn't be so much of a problem for Labour. But when this comes after the scandal with her CV and then the chaos that the budget has caused, the lies that we were told, it seems clear to us that this is a woman who thought that it would be easy peasy to make the numbers add up and find the money that she needs, and now is sort of scrambling, frustrated, no idea what to do, going to the regulators, even though she had 14 years on the opposition benches, to have a think of what she might do to grow the economy. She's just scrambling, no idea what to do. It feels like she's out of control. And then when you add this in and find out that potentially she was under investigation for splashing cash on the company credit cards at Halifax, that really does add to the idea that this is a woman who is not competent and cannot be trusted. We of course had a big scare in the markets as well. It's just not looking good for her and the Labour Party in general at the moment.
Can she... I mean, look, Keir Starmer has said, I stand by my Chancellor, I stand by my Chancellor, rather. He would say that. I mean, we've heard leaders over the years say, I stand by them, they're a great person, then 2 weeks later they've gone. Will she survive all of this?
I'm not sure if she will. I think that she is on very shaky ground. Keir Starmer keeps saying that he'll stand by her, and it sounds like she is saying that she denies these allegations from a whistleblower that there was an investigation into her. But as you say, often Prime Ministers will say that they stand by someone in their cabinet and the next week they're gone. Whenever you're questioning whether a Prime Minister or a member of the cabinet is going to have to resign or be fired, you have to ask, is there a clear successor in the waiting? So you have to ask, who could take over from Rachel Reeves? Is there someone clearly confident and clearly capable that we would be able to replace her with? That might be a bit of a sticking point if Keir Starmer doesn't see anyone else that he could fill the position with. I mean, there seems to be a complete lack of qualifications in the cabinet generally across almost all the roles. I mean, don't get me started on David Lammy as foreign secretary. Yeah. No business people in the cabinet, unless you count James Timpson, who's not an MP. We've got a cabinet that's completely full of Remainers, so nobody really in a great position to negotiate with the EU in a way that honours them. There is a huge lack of competence and qualification in the cabinet generally. It might be quite difficult to replace her.
Well, I mean, who would replace her? That's the problem, isn't it? I mean, and early doors, you know, do they, if they take another sort of high-profile minister like Yvette Cooper and move her from the Home Office, she's only been there half an... You know, this is how stuff gets... You're kind of caught in a cul-de-sac. This is how stuff gets scuppered in government, is it? Keep moving people around. No one's there for long enough to ever do anything. So you could move Cooper. I don't know what her qualifications she would have in the Treasury.
Well, as I said, you've got nobody in the cabinet that is an entrepreneur, unless you count James Timpson dealing with the prisons. And that is a really big problem. You really need someone who is business-minded, who understands entrepreneurship to grow the economy. And she was it really showed that they don't understand business when we had that budget, when we had a chancellor saying we're going to have a budget for growth, and yet she hikes up taxes on businesses and then seems to be shocked that we've got a millionaire leaving the country every 45 minutes. Anyone who's ever worked in business and spent enough time in the private sector will know that that was obviously going to happen.
Maybe it has to be Timpson then. He could also get Angela Rayner a discount on her Jimmy Choo repairs, couldn't he? So, you know, what's not to like? Let's move to this story. And we seem to be getting one of these a day at the moment. The Ghanaian woman who wins the right to stay in Britain after staging a marriage that she did not actually attend. She won her immigration appeal to stay in the UK, citing a marriage to a German citizen. It occurred apparently in Ghana in 2018, despite neither the bride or the groom even going there. I would say that's the definition of not a marriage, surely.
I mean, who doesn't turn up to their own marriage? This is very
It's a bit weird, right? I mean, sometimes a guest doesn't turn up, but the bride and the groom...
Yeah, very clearly someone just trying to game the system. And sure enough, after this proxy marriage that they didn't turn up to, when she came to the UK to live with her new husband, after 15 months the marriage fell apart and started divorce proceedings. And very conveniently, the divorce proceedings ended just 3 years after the marriage, which was the perfect amount of time to qualify her to stay in the country. What a coincidence, eh?
It's a bit weird, isn't it? Again, who are the people? I always grew up thinking that judges and those that head up impressive tribunals with big salaries and huge impressive titles knew something that we didn't know. You know, they were on to things that were, you know, their brains were bigger than most of us. But they're not, clearly, demonstrably, they're not. We've seen so many just this week, paedophiles being allowed to stay because of a right to family life, the chicken nugget story.
Oh, the chicken nugget story. That was just...
I mean, that was up there with one of the best you've ever heard. There was another one about somebody...
That made me completely lose faith in our judicial system.
Absolutely. And there was another one about somebody who couldn't be deported somewhere because it was too hot or... I mean, these are just bonkers. I mean, they would just be funny in any other area. But
it's insane, and it's becoming clear that it is not just a few crazy cases. This is something that is happening all the time. I'm sure there are plenty of stories very similar to these that don't even make the headlines. There are so many of them. It seems like we're incapable of deporting people from this country if they are criminals and foreign nationals. They can give any reason they can think of, and they'll be able to stay in the country. This country is always, I know this case about Lagania maybe doesn't have anything to do with the ECHR, but just in this general problem of not being able to deport people, this country will always obey the ECHR. But meanwhile, you look at places like Germany, France, they're part of the ECHR, but they'll just ignore it when it suits them. We've just had that horrendous thing happen in Munich with the car driving into a group of people, and they've straight away said, yep, we'll ship him back to Afghanistan and we'll start shipping more people back to Afghanistan. The UK, if the ECHR said, oh no, you can't send anyone back to Afghanistan because it's an unsafe country, they'll just do whatever the ECHR says. But countries like Germany, they're happy to ignore the ECHR when what they've said is obviously bonkers.
Yeah, and that's probably going to increase with what's going to happen with voting over there in the next couple of weeks. So we will watch with interest. Voters over here demand benefit crackdown. A new poll shows 53% of the public believe benefit rules are too lax. I mean, that's the highest in these percentage polls since 2019. 43% of Labour voters now support tougher welfare rules. That's up from 26% last year. It doesn't specify where specifically you would look at. We know the budget for welfare is not only out of control by any political measure, but it's going to grow and it's going to get worse as the years go on. Mental health issues and all sorts of other areas around benefits are under the microscope. But where do you begin in slashing the benefit bill?
Well, I think one thing that I found really interesting, which is Fraser Nelson's documentary that he did with Channel 4 on this. I really recommend people take a listen to that if they haven't already. And there are a couple of big things that stood out to me here that are exacerbating this problem. So first of all, the NHS, they are completely overrun and they will just sign you off on long-term sickness benefit without giving you any treatment for that long-term sickness that you are experiencing. There's no solution. It's just, right, we'll sign you off and then go away. We're not going to give you any help with the problems that you've got. So that needs to be resolved. We need to sort out the NHS. But the other thing that was very clearly keeping people on long-term sickness benefit for a very long time is the fact that even if they want to get a job, they are terrified to get one, because if they come off the benefit and then get a job, and let's say a week later they get fired from that job, or they realise that they're still not well enough, they're not up to it, they are then left with no income. It might be an absolute nightmare for them to try and qualify for that benefit again. So it's just not worth it. So something needs to change in the system where people who are on benefits can be given a chance to try out having a job, and if it doesn't work out, they know that they can fall back on it. Else you're going to keep people in this loop forever.
Yeah, spot on. I'm bound to ask you as well about Donald Trump and what has happened. Is Donald Trump about to save the world? Is he going to be the man that makes it all happen? I mean, he said when he was running for office, look, I'll sort Ukraine out in a day. I think it was a slight, exaggeration. I don't think he specifically meant it, but the spirit was that I'll sort this out quickly. There are inroads being made, but not everybody's happy. The Ukrainians are getting that sense that they might be kind of slightly sidelined on this. Some are calling it appeasement of Putin. Not a good look. It will simply embolden Vladimir Putin if Trump kind of favours a little bit with the Russians, and many simply arguing this was an invasion by Russia on a European country, end of. There's nothing else to debate here. So why would Vladimir Putin be given a priority on the negotiations around this?
I think that it is absolutely fantastic that Trump is now getting involved in negotiations here, trying to bring this war to an end. There are so many innocent lives that have been lost here. Something needs to happen. Now, Zelensky is a bit upset that he wasn't the first to be involved in the phone call. I don't think there's anything wrong with Trump giving Putin a phone call first, seeing his position before going to Zelensky and saying, this is the situation, would you consider a deal with X, Y and Z? Or, Trump is not going to be able to end the war without Zelensky's approval. Of course, he's going to have a final say there. I think it's a hard decision to make, but I think there are a lot of people who will see that there's probably no way that Putin is going to give up some of the areas that he has captured. Putin, he knows that he'll be in big trouble politically in his own country if he has spent an insane amount of Russian money, and a lot of Russian soldiers have lost their lives to ultimately lose and get absolutely nothing out of it. They will keep on fighting and ending innocent lives there if that's what they have to do to make it look like they've won something there. So I'm interested to see what happens. I'm interested to see what kind of deal is proposed, if there is one, and hopefully we can end the bloodshed soon. I think when you ask the question, is Trump about to save the world? Well, it's not just in Ukraine. He's potentially going to use tariffs and whatnot to get countries to behave how he wants to. For example, we're hearing that here in Britain, Keir Starmer may have to water down things like the online safety bill in order to avoid Trump tariffs. He'll have to embrace free speech. These are all good things, I think. And I've just generally been very impressed with how assertive and productive Trump has been in such a short time in the White House.
Listen, Chloe, thank you for your time. Chloe Dobbs, political commentator with us on the programme. Over to you in a couple of moments. 0344 499 1000. Michelle says you could replace Reeves with a robot. It would do a better job. Jacques says in Andover, Reeves isn't going anywhere. Starmer wants her there to keep on destroying the economy. Plus, who would replace her? She's the bottom of the barrel. Who would replace her? Would Starmer? I mean, Starmer's not going to do that, I don't sense. This from Leslie. Rachel says she was offered a job from Goldman Sachs but turned down the offer. Why would you turn down a job offer from Goldman Sachs? She said, yeah, the money was great. It was much better. I didn't want it. I think she was going to follow her political dreams. And wow, isn't she amazing in her position as Chancellor? And Rob says, Rachel from Accounts, what I cannot fathom is how on earth she thought the press would never investigate her history. Smacks of delusion and arrogance to me, says Rob in Worthing. Yeah, I think she's playing catch-up on that. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk. Back to you next.
Are you satisfied that the government is going to look into this and actually do something as opposed to just do an inquiry which results in not much change of anything at all?
I think the key thing is we heard the word that's been used a lot by the government recently to come into power, certainly of public inquiry, but the difference is that this is a statutory one, so it's judge-led. And statutory is the word we wanted and needed to hear, because that means that those organisations and individuals particularly have to take a stand.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 21 minutes after 2 o'clock. We've got tech a little bit later on as well. We'll be talking to the councillor, or the former councillor, who has not happy with what is happening with reform. So he's left. What's the deal there? We've seen a little bit of this. I'm intrigued by the reasons. We'll check that out on the programme a little later as well. Dan is down in London. Dan, what have you got for us? On Labour, what are your thoughts? Hi.
Hi. So if you looked at Starmer when he ran for leader, the Labour Party, they stood on clear platforms like nationalising the railways and utilities, of reducing the economic inequality, having an ethical policy, foreign policy, etc. And he's basically gone back on every single policy. And I think it's shown that they don't really stand for anything. And I think that's the big problem with this country, is that if you look at most of the Labour Party politicians and the Tory party politicians, they kind of align on most of the same things, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on the
so
significant stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and it shows you that it's not really a democracy we have in this country. And whether you liked him or loathed him, I think when you had Corbyn in, that he did, you know what he stood for, you know, and you know he meant it, you know, and he had a big history of everything, you know, of his voting record. Sure. And it's disappointing. I mean, I didn't think much of him anyway. I didn't think much of Starmer. I didn't think much is going to change. And I think now this is why we're seeing reform come up and doing so well, because the Labour Party, they had so many people vote for them, you know, on the expectation that they were going to deliver on their promises. And
who were the bit that I don't get, Dan, is that, I mean, there will be some people who will go from Labour to Reform, but it's not a normal journey, right? to be a socialist one day and then a supporter of Nigel Farage the next. You don't tend to. I can see there's a crossover in the Venn diagram, but it's not the usual. Yeah, I can see it from the Conservatives to Reform, but Labour to Reform. Does that tell us how bad Labour is, that people are genuinely, completely changing their ideology?
Yeah, exactly. And I believe that is because, you know, there's two narratives. There's that you're poor and people who are doing well are doing worse off than ever before. And the first reason is that we had a transfer of wealth from working class people to billionaires, you know, the big tax avoiders in this country. We've not had enough investment in council housing, etc., etc. So there's that narrative, or there's the narrative that all your problems are caused by immigrants, you know, and that's, you know, whether you believe it or not, that's Nigel Farage's narrative, you know. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Labour are a party, they're supposed to be the party of, you know, helping out poor people by addressing the economic inequalities, by taxing the richest, etc. But Labour are not doing that, and they're actually playing to the tune of Nigel Farage now and saying, "Oh, we need to deport all these people." And I just think I've seen it with family and friends. I've seen them, how they've gone from supporting the likes of Jeremy Corbyn, but then now supporting reform.
I mean, that's incredible, right? I mean, in terms of, you know, a student of politics in 10 years' time, writing about that would be the most fascinating analysis of how appetites have changed, how priorities have changed, expectations and affiliations, right?
Exactly. The thing is, the sad thing is, I mean, I don't know what Farage's views on his foreign policy are, but I mean, if it's something like Trump's, you know, I'm a left winger. But like, I think Trump's got the correct position on Ukraine and foreign policy, as in stepping back. You know, let's stop. And that's a left-wing position. Yeah. But now you have Starmer committing billions. You know, we're meant to be, you know, a poor. You know, apparently we all have to tighten our belts, but we've got enough money to give to Ukraine and Israel every year. You know, we've got billions apparently for that.
I mean, it's all of that, isn't it? I know. You know, I do understand the need for a sort of international cooperation. We all understand that. I understand that sometimes there might be a good argument that you assist on something. It might be in your benefit, in your own benefits, for lots of different reasons. But we say, when you look at what's happening in America with the sort of Elon Musk purge on wastage and US aid and all those areas that they're listing, some of the millions that are being spent, then you have to, at some point, go, this has got to stop.
Absolutely.
We just need to recalibrate and add some common sense into the equation.
Exactly. And, the thing is, I don't know whether, it's a good chance Farage might be Prime Minister at the next elections. I don't know if he will, but the thing is he going to, will he make the country better? As in, if at the end of the day, if we kick the immigrants out, are the very richest going to start dividing the wealth? I'm not on about like people on 100 grand or even $1 million a year. The people who want billions each year, who are actually sending the money offshores, who are buying our politicians. I mean, if you look at another thing about the Labour Party, you see they're getting donations from people in tax havens, and that's why they're not going to take on the super rich. And because we're not a poor country. We're not a poor country. We have got so much money, but that money is being transferred, like I said, from the working class people to the owners of capital, basically. And unless that changes, and is Farage going to do that, take that on? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But,
well, I mean, that leaves us to who do we go with, in 4 years' time, when lots of things will have changed. Dan, listen, you've raised some brilliant points there. Thank you for your call. The real food for thought from Dan. Sean says, I believe their lawyers are giving these people the instructions on what to say to be able to get permission to stay here in the UK. This is reference the various bonkers cases of people who've been allowed to stay here. This practice should be illegal. Surely. Oh, no, it's exactly that, Sean. It's exactly that. Someone's gone, play the old chicken nugget card, it'll go down a treat. I don't know how a lawyer would advise somebody who is a paedophile to be able to argue the case for a family life. I mean, that's just... it would be satire anywhere else, but it isn't. It's not only mad, it's horrendously and dangerously disturbing. Jimmy in Wales, or is it Jimmy Wales? It could be. Starmer is the weakest and most duplicitous PM in history. There is such a lack of talent in his available pool of ministers that he has to keep people like Reeves and Lammy in high office. These two may be utterly incompetent, but the most dangerous MPs in the country are Miliband and Ledbetter. Does Starmer even know how much danger these two represent to the people of this country, says Jimmy. I mean, Ledbetter is the person behind the assisted dying bill. I mean, look, in fairness to her, she's not the only MP that supports that. There's quite a lot of them, and there is in other countries as well. I don't think she's a great person, by the way, and I base that mostly on the Batley school teacher, because I've heard almost nothing about him from her, and he was her constituent. Can't make it up. 0344 499 1000. This in from Johnny. Labour stand for tolerance, unless you disagree with them, of course. Great show. Johnny in Kettering. Rob says, Rachel from Accounts. What I can't fathom is how on earth she thought the press would never investigate her history. May have read that one, but it still makes sense and worth reading again. And Liam says, Labour stand for no cronyism, reference Lord Ali. Low migration, reference the latest stats. Taking lies out of politics, reference Rachel from Accounts. More money for the working class, reference farmers. Labour doing well so far, huh? Good point, Liam. Love it. More from you on the way. 0344 499 1000.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Just gone 2:30. Eviction claims by private landlords have hit a record high ahead of Labour's rental reforms. The government plans to ban no-fault evictions next year and tighten rent increase rules. Property investors are rushing to reclaim homes, with repossessions claims topping 30,000 for the very first time. Let's speak with Paul Champlina, founder of Landlord Action, a friend of the programme, regularly helps us out with these kind of stories. It's almost as if we could have said this a couple of years ago, Paul. I mean, I don't know how long we've been talking about this, but one of the upshots, of course, if you put so much stringency around regulation, if you choke landlords to the point that it becomes an impossible profession, then some are going to want to get out the industry, and that's exactly what's happening, and it seems they're doing it in rather large numbers.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's a bit of I told you so. I said it. I called about 5 years ago when the Renters Reform White Paper came out, and, you know, obviously it started with the tax, and then interest rates went up, and then there was talk about, obviously, rental laws changing, and a lot of them coming in are really, really reasonable. We knew that Section 21, the 2-month notice to end the contract, and the reason they're bringing it in is to give tenants greater protection, but the courts are an absolute nightmare. As you know, I run Landlord Action. Last year we did almost 4,000 instructions. The courts were a nightmare. We got one case where a landlord is not getting rent. We've been waiting for an eviction day for 15 months, right? Someone on social media said 21 months. Can you imagine not getting your rent for all that time? The Section 21, the main reason why people are serving Section 20 at the moment is they want to get out. They've had enough of being landlords. And these are the smaller landlords. And you might have good tenants that are in the properties being asked to leave. So the biggest losers in all of these are the tenants. From the whole point of this regulation coming in is to help the tenants. So it was obvious that use it before losing it. So what's happening now is I believe that the Renters' Rights Bill is going to come in, I reckon, by the 1st of October. There's going to be a transitional period. So from now until that day, you're going to get landlords serving notices, because if they don't, then some landlords that will want their properties back, you have to set down a reasonable ground, which is fair enough. But so it's the practicalities in all of this which is worrying and spooking the industry.
And it's also, you know, things like, you know, your energy rating, you've got to get that to a C. Now, it might be a D. I saw Ed Miliband put a tweet out saying, oh, typical Tories, they don't want people to have warm homes. You might have a perfectly warm home that happens to just come up as a D, something that isn't required in the selling sector. I'm not sure what the issue is with council-owned properties. They might have a different set of criteria on this, but it just seems... When I saw Miliband tweet that, and I've seen Rayner say similar things, Paul, my suspicion is at the bottom of all of this is a sort of a left-wing distrust of landlords, a belief that these are the pirates of industry. The word landlord has become a pejorative. It's used almost, you know, they're all greedy. They don't care if they've got a roof on the bloody house. They don't care if people are freezing and dying of mould. I mean, that might represent a very tiny percentage of it. There's no area or industry or type you'd be able to stereotype so blatantly and casually as a landlord, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fed up to the teeth. I mean, I've been working and acting for landlords from the days when I worked in a law firm. I started acting for landlords 35 years ago. I set up Landlord Action, which I still run to this day, 25 years ago in 2000.
Wow.
I mean, yeah, there's always regulation that comes in, and of course you need enforcement. But, you know, I'm out doing talks and representing landlords, and they come up to me. There's a lot of landlords that are holding fine, and they're watching and keeping calm, because landlords are very adaptable. But the bashing of landlords, it's just non-stop. And of course, yes, you know, and I did an interview yesterday with Mike about obviously the new towns and the buildings and the plan. That's great and that's brilliant, but obviously we're not going to build 1.5 million properties in 5 years, because we don't have the skills to be able to do that.
Or the materials to build it with.
all the materials to, but we need 20,000 bricklayers, you know, and of course they want apprentices, and they said they're not going to use migrants. I mean, that's a whole different story altogether. But you know, you've got obviously the EPC changes, and don't get me started on Ed Miliband, for God's sake. I mean, it's just, you know, it's everything that they're trying to do for tenants, and I get that, and there's a lot of campaigning, you know, with a lot of groups like Shelter and Generation Rent, but they're not working with the industry. It's a them and us scenario. And the reality is, a lot of landlords that I speak to, and we're seeing them day in, day out at Landlord Action, they're saying, Paul, we've had enough. And then they're serving a notice on a tenant where they might not have put the rent up for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, because rents are becoming unaffordable for tenants. And I get that, and I feel that. They're being asked to leave a property. And then, of course, I spoke to a lady yesterday who's just had the all clear from cancer, and she's got 2 kids. And I get people that reach out to me on social media. Her landlord is selling. She said he was a lovely, lovely guy. He's had enough. He's selling. Now I've got to go into temporary accommodation. I've got to see the council. I've got to go in the point scoring system. I don't know how long I'm going to be in a hotel for. And then I've got to try and find a property within the borough. That's the unintended consequence of all of that. But politically, they don't see it.
I was talking to one landlord down in South London who was on this journey of changing his energy rating so that it became to a C. It was going to cost around about £10,000 to do that on the one property he owns. That's almost 2 years' rent for him. Completely impossible. It will cost way too much and lose too much in the process of changing over. The house, he said, by the way, is beautiful, cosy and warm. It hasn't got high energy bills. It just doesn't happen to tick this sort of imaginary box of it's got to be a C rather than a D. So he's selling up. So the one bedroom flat, but one person living in there has got to go. So there's another example of the local authority will then have to, or somebody will have to try and find a place for that person to live that's affordable. And he'd kept the rent down for like the last couple of years as well on that property because he had a really good tenant. He liked the tenant liked him. Everything was tickety-boo. Ed Miliband came along and scuppered it.
Well, that's the majority. Majority of tenancies work out well. I mean, obviously they're going to change because obviously they're going to go to 1 month tenancies. I think the reality is that, I mean, I get all of that. And I think that landlords really don't need that they you know, I spoke to a pal of mine. I went down to Brighton, and one of my mates is one of the biggest landlords in Brighton, and he's doing something like, I think it was 60 refurbs where he said it's costing him an absolute fortune because that's the lending criteria. So look, the standard of properties will go up. Depending on type of property and where you're at, I think with landlords, there's ways of getting up the grades up to a C where you don't have to spend as much. But in some scenarios, that's an issue. You know, there's not enough EPC assessors and stuff like that. I think the unintended consequence as well is that landlords in the new world of the Renters' Rights Bill are going to be much more stringent on referencing.
That's true.
They take out rent guarantee insurance. They're going to use companies like Rent Guarantor, where you've got to have a guarantor and stuff like that. And you can't charge more than 1 month in advance. That's being banned as well. So overseas tenants, student tenants, maybe older tenants that are renting out, you know, there's a whole load of stuff that's really going to have impact on the world of renting when our stock is coming down. We're not building enough. You're having other landlords buying other landlords. What we are seeing, and I'm acting for a few, is big institutional investors that are coming in, pension funds that are buying blocks. So, you know, and there is an argument to say, well, the government clearly want bigger professional landlords than the smaller landlords. And we are seeing a lot of the smaller landlords leave the market.
Yeah. And this would all be very well if we had loads of houses. I mean, that you could sort of let this one slide. If there were so many empty homes, so much choice for renters, then you can go, well, it doesn't really matter. You know, we can afford to be very, very discerning and you know, put in rules, wacky as they may be, sensible, some of them might be. But we haven't. And if we are taking property away from the market, we are causing another problem.
Well, of course we are. I mean, you know, where's all these first-time buyers buying these properties, which is what, you know, what Boris was pushing when he was in power. You know, we have a severe housing shortage. We have a growing population. It's a big problem. And I understand. I agree with the NIMBYs, you know, trying to get rid of the NIMBYs and the relaxing of obviously planning. That makes total sense. But you've got to get building. You know, you need a lot more building. And you need to treat the private rental sector as an industry which is helping sectors, which is helping families, which are helping vulnerable tenants renting. But the reality is, when it becomes really antiquated and a lot more cumbersome, and landlords are going to go through loads of rules and regulations, it comes to a point, well, what's the point? And of course, interest rates going up. So it was inevitable that evictions will go up. We've had the second highest. 2025, that will go up as well, because when the ban comes in, there's going to be more Section 21s until it's banned, so more tenants are going to be asked to leave. And then, of course, there's the affordability issue where rents are higher and more tenants will go into rent arrears. So it doesn't look great, unfortunately. All I can say is, if you're a tenant and a landlord, make sure you build a real good, solid relationship, have trust, because, of course, a landlord wants a good tenant to look after their property, pay the rent on time, and stay in the property as long as possible. That's what landlording's all about.
Absolutely.
And to make sure a tenant has a property that they see as a home.
Spot on. Paul, always a pleasure. Thank you. Paul Champlina, founder of Landlord Action. And Sally, on this very point, says we recently sold our rental property, evicting a really good tenant in the process, as getting an older terrace property from EPC D to a, that's the energy rating, D to a C was going to cost over 10,000 quid. Almost the same story that I was just quoting. It's just not viable, particularly with a mortgage to pay. Utter madness. I mean, it's that, right? You have to be sensitive about it and go, is this a one-size-fits-all model? I mean, the house I live in, which obviously is my own house, so it's not a rental thing, but it's is it a D or an E rating in energy terms? I wouldn't be allowed to rent that out. And I don't know whether there's very much you could do with a property that's quite old that would ever get it to a C rating. So let's just say I was in a position to go, I'm going to move somewhere else. We're not going to sell this one. I'm going to rent this one out. It would be illegal for me to rent it out. I could sell it, fine. I couldn't rent it. Bonkers. And by the way, it's quite a warm house. I mean, it's, if you didn't put any heating on, it'll be cold like any house would. But I don't think anybody would ever say, oh, it's so cold in this house. It just happens to not fulfill the man-made criteria of it being a C rating. We stick the heating on and it warms it up. It kind of seems to do the job. But of course, that's not what's happening here. You've got to fulfill that criteria. And if you're taking property out of the rental market, you're going to have a problem, because the reality is it's been landlords that have almost saved governments from an even greater housing. There's already a housing crisis. There'd be a bigger one if it wasn't for private landlords who are stepping in every step of the way. But now we've got record numbers who are actually leaving the industry because they can't stomach the new rules and the new regulations and everything that goes with it. It does seem slightly reckless. The Tories were no better on this. Michael Gove was also wedded to this one as well. I get the need for good standards. Nobody is disputing that. Most of these homes are good standards. If you're a landlord I'll tell you what I would do. If you're a landlord that is a ruthless landlord, and you don't care about any of this stuff, you don't get things fixed, there's mould in the rooms, kids are getting breathing disorders because of that. If you're doing it, I would change the law so that you spent so many years in jail for those kind of offences, because I think these people are a disgrace. These sort of cartels that own, half a dozen, 2 dozen sometimes properties, usually in inner cities. They don't have any kind of care over who lives there or what. All they want is the rent. It hasn't had a lick of paint for years. It's not good to... Those kind of landlords, you'd be getting 25 years in the chiller as far as I'm concerned. I'd properly throw the book at slum landlords in that respect. Of course you would. But they just don't represent anywhere near most landlords. So it's a daft kind of almost creating a further problem that the government are doing here, just so they can have that, again, what we started this programme with, what do Labour stand for, the belief they have the moral high ground. Giving landlords a bit of a kicking is that. I see Labour supporters on social media, the way they talk about farmers, the way they talk about, well, farmers don't want us to pay their fair share like everybody else does. Well, that doesn't even define the story of the inheritance tax with farmers, because they're not selling up. They're retaining their farm, they just happen to be keeping it. It's a business rather than a profit. And then the private school thing, private school parents who are always defined as the rich, and of course some of them are, others might not be, but the fact is they're a great example of people who are not using the state system. They're a net benefit to the system because they're not utilising the state system. They're paying themselves for that. And then you get into what defines private education. There's all but of course the left love that, and they will love the landlord story. They will love it because they think what they think is not true. But it will satisfy them. That's just rich old landlords. Landlords, you know, it's a horrendous word. It's a pejorative. It's an insult. You're a landlord, scum. It's that. It's all of that. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
They're all pulling back from DEI. But interestingly enough here, where there are those international firms, accountancy firms like Deloitte. Deloitte has pulled back in America. It's not here. The thing that's frightening about Britain at the moment is we're now an island. Europe is swinging to the right. America is swinging to the right. Australia is about to. Canada is about to. And we are increasingly on a limb and run. For heaven's sake, our foreign relations are in that safe and steady hands of David Lammy.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 10 to 3. We've got the voice of doom here. But by the way, I just realised it's 30 years ago today that the original Talk radio began. Can you believe that? Was anybody listening? I wasn't there at the very beginning. It wasn't far after, by the way, because it started on a Valentine's Day, and it was a bit all over the place, which was sort of slightly the attraction. But some of us from that first year are still around. James Well, myself, Ash. There's a few other backroom people as well that are knocking around the building too. That was 30 years ago. Good Lord. 3 decades. Voice of Doom. It is, of course, the political mystery voice bit. It's day 4 4, Amy. It is day 4. Day 4. Here's the voice.
I think it would be very difficult.
Who is that? I don't know the answer, by the way. So this is new on me as well. I still don't know. I still can't work it out. I know it's a tough one. Here it is again.
I think it would be very difficult.
Don't call in. There is no prize. You can message in if you fancy having a crack at this. 87222. That's 87222. If you think you know, we'll tell you on the other side of the news. Here's the voice again.
I think it would be very difficult.
No, I'm not getting it. But if you know, maybe we'll get an answer. If we don't, it rolls over to Monday. Oh, I'm not here Monday. It'll roll over till Tuesday. Stand by for that. Do we know who's here on Monday, Adam? Have we got any intel on that so far? David Bull, apparently, is going to be in the hot seat. The Bull is back on Monday, right here at 1 o'clock. Back to your calls. Oh, can we hear the voice again? I've got to hear it one more time, Amy.
I think it would be very difficult.
87222, if you think you know. Philippa is in Dorset on Labour. What is going on, Philippa? Good afternoon.
Hi, Ian. Lovely to speak to you.
And you too. What are your thoughts?
Well, I was a Labour voter all of my life.
Yeah.
And my ideology around politics is completely changing because what I thought Labour stood for, they don't stand for anymore.
That's interesting.
They used to stand for supporting the NHS.
Yep.
Because they started the NHS. They used to be about supporting education.
Sure.
I'm a secondary school teacher. They used to talk about supporting the vulnerable, the elderly, and they used to support people who didn't have a voice in this country.
Yeah.
And they supported people like the miners' strike, and they stood up for equality and all of those things, which is why I ran as a Labour councillor in the local election, but no more. No more. I am sick to the back teeth of once politicians get into power, they lose all their moral high ground and they just do exactly what they want to do. They don't listen to people anymore. And I'm disabled. I was born with cerebral palsy back in 1970.
Sure.
I've been disabled all my life, and even Labour are now turning against the disabled and using us as scapegoats to be able to claw back money to put into this black hole that's been created by the politicians, Labour and Conservatives, over the last God knows how long. And I don't agree with it because I believe that disabled people have a voice. We have got a lot to contribute to society. We're just not given the opportunities. As a secondary school teacher, I tried to get into teaching later on in life.
Mm-hmm.
The education system would not take me on as a teacher in a permanent job because they saw me as a liability.
Wow.
It meant that I would then be there as a role model for students, and I would be talking about disability and what that meant as lived experience. I'm doing a PhD on disability history and activism and all that kind of thing as well. And I was also in the top 100 of the Shaw Trust's most influential disabled people in the country last year.
Okay.
We need to have a voice.
Who is the voice then? I mean, I know this could be a whole different phone-in, but who is the voice that you think will represent you, Philippa?
I need to see people like me that resonate with me in places of positions of power.
Is there a political party that is doing that?
At the moment, I don't see it. I don't see.
You're not gravitating to a different party from your core beliefs in Labour to somewhere else.
Well, to be honest, I'm looking at reform purely because I think, as a history teacher, I think English culture, UK culture is going down the pan in this country. Mm-hmm. We are turning so woke now that everything and anything is acceptable. Our morals have gone, our Christian values have gone. You know, we need that back. We need that back. We are judged in a society by how we treat our most vulnerable. So the elderly, so disabled people, you
Yeah.
know, people that are struggling to get into work, and all these people that are on benefits. There are a lot of people that really want to get back into work, who do want to contribute. I do as well, but the problem is that the system doesn't make it easy for you.
Yeah.
You're walking on a tightrope all the time, and employers don't make it easy for those coming into jobs, especially as disabled people.
Yeah, I can't imagine, because if you don't have a disability, then although you can say, yeah, that must be tough, I can sympathise with that, but you don't ever really know what it's like, and there's maybe not much you can do about that if you're not in that position, but it's only when you speak to somebody like yourself. Listen, Philippa, sounds like you're on a journey at the moment, and how interesting as well that Philippa raises that issue of what we're asking the question, what do Labour actually stand for? Once upon a time, as she pointed out, you absolutely knew what Labour stood for. It was quite easy to say what you knew what the Tories stood for. That's all kind of changed. It's all gone away, and which is why, you know, Reform have come along, and there's a new kind of appetite in town. I think that's the only way I can define it, and I've said this every day, I think, this week, that in the same way that the American Republicans and others had to battle with the idea that the Reagan type of republicanism had died. It served its purpose. It was hugely popular. It's exactly what was needed, but no longer. There's a huge new set of rules, regulations, narratives and appetites in town. And that's why Donald Trump has filled that void. Over here, I sense we're in a similar position. Don't go away, Anne, in Surrey. I will talk to you in the next section. We've got lots to talk about. We're talking property. We are going to speak to, talking of Reform, someone who's done the kind of opposite and left Reform, a councillor who said, actually, this isn't the party I want to be part of. We'll talk to him in a couple of moments' time. Will Guyot's with us back talking tech as well. Naturally, hopefully we've got a right answer to the voice of doom, the political mystery voice. Have a listen again.
I think it would be very difficult.
Oh, come on, one more time.
I think it would be very difficult.
Any ideas? Don't call in because you ain't going to win a prize. But if you want to have a crack at it, 87222, you can message us there. More comments from you on the way as well. Lots going on at this end. It's a big, big hour on the way. Don't be missing any of it. Our lines are open. Before all of that, let's get the latest news headlines here on Talk. The time is 3 o'clock.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is 3 minutes after 3 o'clock right here on Talk. We are talking this afternoon about the government. Why would we not talk about the Labour government, the flavour of government we have? We don't quite know what it is. We can't define it. What do Labour actually stand for? Bearing in mind they've been through in 6 months stories that would normally take about 6 years for most governments. We've got a shed load there, whether it's Starmer's suits, whether it's WhatsApp groups or the Chancellor's CV. It is building up. What do the Labour Party actually stand for? We'll continue to look at that. Also this afternoon, a prominent Reform UK councillor has resigned from the party, saying he has no faith in Nigel Farage's leadership. He's concerned about the party's direction. This is as Reform UK are on the rise. What could have happened? We'll speak to that councillor shortly. And YouTube is celebrating the 20th anniversary of its first video upload, with more than 2 billion people now using the site to watch, share and react to content. Everything you need to know and all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. It's interesting on the YouTube story. I was trying to explain to he was watching something on TV yesterday. Can't remember what it was or what it was on. It was either Netflix or Disney or Prime, one of those. And I said, look, we've got to stop, got to go to bed. And he said, oh, but I want to watch the rest of it. I said, well, just watch it tomorrow. I said, you know, when I was a kid, if you had to stop watching a programme halfway through, you never saw it again until by chance it might have. If it was Scooby-Doo and your mum said, we're going shopping now, and you think, what, in the middle of Scooby-Doo? What kind of fascist regime am I living in here? Nobody should interrupt a child during an episode of Scooby-Doo. I mean, it's just inappropriate. It's some form of abuse, frankly. Scooby-Doo was the doyen of all things that a child should be surrounded by in their wholesome childhood experiences. But if you were taken out during an episode of Scooby-Doo or anything else for that matter, you didn't get to see you didn't come home and go, I'll pick up where I left off. Today, you don't lose that. There's nothing you can't watch. You can watch it again. You can watch it. It doesn't matter. It's always there forever. Nothing gets missed. Nothing can't be found. Nothing is impossible. I'm sure someone's going to mail me and say, I couldn't get hold of, I still haven't been able to see that episode of Doctor Who from 1986. I'm sure there's examples, but you broadly take the point. And YouTube, of course, is behind much of that. But is it the same as it used to be? I don't know. Voice of Doom, OK? Have we got a right answer on the Voice of Doom? Remember, this is the voice we played you.
I think it would be very difficult.
I think it would be very difficult. Some of the wrong answers: Steve Norris, no. Jim Pryor, it isn't. Peter Mandelson, Roy Hattlesey, Michael Heseltine, David Davis. It's none of those. Nor is it John Healey or Seb Coe. It's not even David Frost or Michael Portillo. But we have got a right answer. Roger in Worthing, along with Michelle, unknown location, got this correct. Norman Tebbit is the answer. Can we hear that again?
I think it would be very difficult.
That's not Norman Tebbit, I'm telling you now. This is a con. I'm writing to Ofcom, Adam. This is a flipping con. Hear it again?
I think it would be very difficult.
Oh, yeah, it is Norman Tebbit, isn't it? Norman Tebbit, former Thatcherite prominent cabinet minister, of course, famous for many, many reasons. Get on your bike and look for work. Didn't quite say that, but it was in that ballpark. And, of course, he was tragically badly injured in the Brighton bombing, as was his wife as well. But never went out of the headline. I've interviewed him a number of times over the years. He's still around, I think, Norman Tebbit. He's obviously a very much older man these days, but that was the voice. Well done to Roger and others who got that correct. Now, a prominent Reform UK member has quit the party. Job West, the former chairman of South Derbyshire, says he has no faith in Nigel Farage's leadership. He also says the promise of democratisation has not materialised. We know that Howard Cox, former mayoral candidate and stood for the seat in Dover, had similar views. Mr West is not alone. Let's speak to him now. Job West, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon.
Now, I'm bound to say, and I'm sure you've heard this before, you know, what are you thinking? This is a party on the rise. They're popular in the polls. They're making inroads. People are crossing from other parties to join them. And you're legging it for the hills. What's gone wrong?
I know it must seem strange, and I understand people's disappointment. And maybe some of them can't believe that I'm doing it. But really, it's down to the fact that democratisation has not happened in Reform UK, and I don't see it happening anytime soon.
When you that's Nigel Farage on the phone already. When you hear, come back, Job, he's like, when you say the democratisation of the party, are you referring to the sort of ownership of the party as distinct from it being a conventional party? Is it that, or is it something else?
No, it's you can't remove Nigel. That's the top and bottom of it. The board that's been set up during the Constitution means that Nigel cannot be removed. Only the board can allow Nigel to be removed. And obviously the board will be there because they've been chosen by Nigel. So there's just no way that you're going to be able to remove Nigel. And really, the point I want to make is that I thought Reform was going to be a grassroots-led party, from the bottom up, not from the top down, for ordinary people to make their voices heard and get their opinions across and have the kind of country that ordinary British people want, not some London-centric elite that are running our country and are running and managing our lives. And that's wrong. People have had enough of that.
Some might say, Job, that, I mean, I get what you mean in terms of how it's set up. To many people, to put it kindly, it's a bit clunky, and others would say it's completely undemocratic. But there might be another school of thought, and I know you would have chewed all of this over and probably had a couple of sleepless nights pondering over what you do. Some would say, look, OK, it ain't perfect, it can be fixed going forward, but at the moment, Nigel Farage is kingpin. He is one of the most effective politicians. Not everybody will like him, but no one will doubt his almost magnetic, mesmeric way of doing political business. He's unconventional, he shoots from the hip, and seems to be very popular. So, yes, it's a battle worth having, but have it further down the line. Just let the party grow first and enjoy the fruits of that, of which you were part of it.
No, you can't do it. Once you spot the problem, you've got to snip it in the bud. And I've spotted this problem. I realise what's going to happen. We're going to just see Reform become a new brand of sales reps for the unelected government of this country, which exists in Whitehall and Westminster, and in the City of London. That's not what people need. These are the very forces, these are the very kinds of people who have actually brought us to the precipice of the disaster that we're looking at in this country at the moment.
When you say these are the very kind of people, who are you referring to when you say these people?
What I'm referring to is the established government. I don't know if anybody's been following interviews by Dominic Cummings, but how he points out that you have an unelected Whitehall class who are actually running the government. It doesn't matter whether you have Keir Starmer or Theresa May or Boris Johnson or Nigel Farage. They're just window dressing. They're just the sales reps. The real people who make the real decisions are not elected.
But that's not an argument with Reform, right? I mean, you acknowledge that that is a wider problem, that the civil servants, if you like, have too much power. And that is true. I mean, there is a lot of power given to civil servants, and much of that needs to be, it wasn't always like that, as you will know, but much of it needs to be deferred back to cabinet ministers and people who've been elected by the people, etc. But if any party is going to do that, surely it's Reform.
I don't believe so. I don't have confidence in Nigel Farage, and I don't have confidence in Zia Youssef. Zia Youssef is a Goldman Sachs city boy. Yeah? He doesn't represent ordinary people. You know, one of the things that really annoyed me during this whole process of the last few months was the way in which I had members of my branch contacting me wanting to cancel their membership because Richard Tice had described a lot of people as that lot. right, in reference to the Tommy Robinson issue. Now, I'm not a Tommy Robinson fan. Yeah, let's make that absolutely clear. But when I had my branch members wanted to cancel their membership, I said, look, don't do it. Stick with us. Reform is the only game in town, right? Don't go. I had one old boy that had come to a branch meeting. He was a retired coal miner from Swadlincote. And he said to me, look, please, Joe, I will stick with you, but you've got to realize that we back Tommy Robinson because he's supporting the protection of girls. Okay, I agreed with him. I said, that's fine. He said, look, will you please watch the film that Tommy Robinson's put out? I said, yes, of course I will. Yeah, I made that promise. Now, before I watched that film, I can't go into exact details, but basically I contacted the management, okay? And I explained what was going on with people wanting to get rid of their membership. And I was told, let them go. They're not wanted. We don't want those people. They're doing our vetting for us. Now, for me, I think I represent my retired coal miner from Swadlincote, and I resent some city boy, some Goldman Sachs boy, and a Mohammedan to boot, telling me that my old coal miner's not wanted because he's worried about girls getting raped.
So it was that powerful juxtaposition that you found yourself against.
Exactly. You've got a class of people down in London who just do not get it. Yeah,
but I know what you're saying, and I know I've spoken to Howard Cox on this, and he had very similar concerns. I know you're aware of that as well. But some might say that this Robinson guy should not be the red line or the criteria on this. I mean, if somebody likes what he's done, he made a documentary. There's a lot to be said about that. It also raises a lot of questions, journalistically and otherwise. But that's another story. But he surely isn't the barometer of, the future of reform. And reform top team are allowed to say, look, we think that this guy's got too much of whatever he says about, grooming gangs or whatever. That might be noble stuff. But there's other things that really aren't the association we're looking for. And the last time a party made that association was UKIP. And look what happened to them when it went to the ballot box. So it's not a good look for us. That's not an unreasonable position, Job, is it?
I completely agree with you. And I was there to see UKIP disintegrate because of the Tommy Robinson issue. And as I've said, I'm not a Tommy Robinson fan, right? That, to me, the reason why I was making that point to you was to point out the kind of individuals that you're dealing with at the top of the party. The issues that really pushed me over the hedge when it came to reform was the treatment dished out to Amber Valley. Amber Valley is a constituency in Derbyshire. No? That's the same county as I'm in. They were a great branch, really great people, great enthusiasm. The locals really liked him. The guy who stood in the general election was a councillor called Alex Stevenson, and he came really close to winning that seat in the general election. They were a great branch, yeah? Everybody admired them. I think they could have been the best branch in the East Midlands, yeah? But the headquarters and the management treated them atrociously. They pulled them up on a paperwork technicality, and they made most of them resign, and they suspended Alex Stevenson. Now, that was wrong. That's when I knew that they were behaving in a disingenuous way.
So the overarching contention, though, Joe, from what I can gather from what you're saying then, is that if reform were ultimately successful and formed a government, it would just be like the previous ones. They would cave in on some policies. The swamp, whatever you want to call them, the civil service, would still be running the show, and it wouldn't look that different to the Conservative Party. Is that, am I getting that about right?
You're bang on the money there. As far as I can see, people say, oh, well, Nigel and Zia have said, we won't make a pact with the Conservatives. Well, they don't have to make a pact with Conservatives. If what you're doing is filling up reform with Conservatives, it doesn't matter that you stick a reform rosette on them if they're Conservatives in the first place. What's the point? You're just replacing one bunch of Conservatives with another bunch of Conservatives, and they will have the same attitude that has brought us to the position that we're in today. Nothing will change. And that's what I am worried about. And that's why I will not back Farage and I will not back Youssef, because I think their intention is to mislead the British people into thinking that they have the option of change when they don't. I think it's a fool.
But surely they could have. I mean, if you become Prime Minister, there's a lot of things you can do. And if you were convincingly elected into office, Nigel Farage in that kind of Trump-type way, common sense, silly bureaucracy, wasted money, daft projects, all of that stuff. So you don't believe the scrapping of all of that? You don't think that would happen, or you think it would happen but not on a scale that we imagine? Well, what's the deal there? Because that's part of the attraction. We know why Trump got in office, because he's no nonsense, he speaks the language of the people, and so does Nigel Farage.
Possibly, if they kept their word. I'm not sure that they would keep their word. I am struck by the fact that a lot of good people who have volunteered to make reform what it is and to put it where it is are being treated shabbily by Nigel Farage and by the management of that party. And to be frank, that's not the way you should treat good volunteers. If you're running an organization, you don't treat your best people the worst, and you don't treat your worst people the best. And that's what a lot of reformers are seeing. And I can guarantee you, you will have reformers ringing up now and telling you that that's the case, that I'm telling you the truth, because this has happened an awful lot throughout the country.
So who are you going to vote for, Job, at the next election? Lib Dems, maybe?
I don't even know. I'm having a crisis now, a personal crisis of who do you vote for? Is voting ever going to change anything? I'm beginning to come to that sort of conclusion.
Well, someone famous once said if it changed anything, they'd ban it, as you know. So maybe there is something in that. Listen, Job, we've got to stop there for time. Thank you for speaking with us. Job West, I know that Mr Farage, Mr Tyson not here to respond to that, but I know that they would refute much of what, if not all of what, Mr West just told us there. He's not happy with the leadership. Look, it's a democracy. He's allowed to not be happy. He's allowed to leave. It's as simple as that. If you're a Reform member or a supporter, do you recognise what he said there? I've got a feeling that he may have his own battles, as many others might along the way. I'm not sure that represents the biggest body of support that Reform currently have. But let us know either way. 0344 499 1000.
This report from the Children's Society here in Britain yesterday said that 1 in 8 kids who identify as animals also identify as trans or non-binary. Do you recognise that connection?
I guess it's not really a connection. I just know that our community is very welcoming to everybody, including the LGBTQ+ community. And so they find a safe place here. So it just happens to fall in line that way.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Gary says, your guest is naive. If you want to be a successful political party in this country, there are certain people you can't associate yourself with. One of them is Tommy Robinson. And that is precisely the position. Doesn't matter whether you agree with some of what Mr. Robinson has said. Doesn't matter whether you think he's spot on everything he says. There is more than one story there. And, you know, UKIP, and I remember knowing the leader of UKIP really well at the time, and there was a dalliance, if you like, with what was going on with sort of former EDL supporters and the like. On paper, it looked like a good idea. But it didn't work out. And then I know there was other reasons why people started leaving what was then UKIP, and then became the Brexit Party, and all that went on at that time. But Gary is absolutely bang on. Thank you for that. Right, before we go to Kevin in Portsmouth on this very issue of reform and the Tories, time to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning £25,000.
It's competition time, and we're giving you a chance to win a whopping £25,000. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
3:25. Kevin is in Portsmouth. How are you doing, Kev?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you,
Yeah,
Ian?
very good, thanks. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
So, can the Tories reform? The answer is no, because a considerable number of them are left-leaning, really shouldn't be in the Tory party at all, probably better off in the Lib Dems or even the sort of pinker bits of the Labour Party.
Pinker bits, yeah.
Well, I mean, as opposed to the full-on Crimson.
Indeed, yeah, the medium rare parts of the party.
Yeah. But basically, as far as reform is concerned, the sensible Conservatives have joined reform. What I'd love to see happen would be the sensible parliamentary Conservatives join reform. Your Ian Duncan Smiths, Jacob Rees-Moggs, people like that. Mark Francois, those sorts of guys. But, you know, the Conservative Party cannot reform because a sizable chunk of it won't let it. These are the people who were quite happy to have internal combustion engines banned in 2030 rather than 2035, which in of itself is completely mad. Mm-hmm. They were quite happy to come up with Boris's oven-ready deal, and it looked great from the outside. It's a shame he left the entrails in. When you tasted it, it was horrible.
There's a lot of food references here.
Well, you know, I like that. I like to try.
Nothing wrong with that. Yeah, keeps you out of a pickle.
But exactly that. But no, seriously, there are too many pinky types in the Conservative Party, and they want to hang on to their jobs, they want to hang on to their positions, they've climbed the greasy pole, they might be trying to get nominated for a seat next time round. And if they start cross-decking now, they might find themselves all the way back down the snake, starting all over again. And they think that reform is going to crash and burn. Well, I don't think reform is going to crash and burn. Yeah. You mentioned UKIP. UKIP is still UKIP. It still exists, I think, somewhere.
Yes, it does. Every time I see that written somewhere, I'm still astonished to go, wow, they are still there.
Yeah, they're still
I
around.
don't say that disparagingly. I think to many people the assumption is they no longer exist.
Yeah, no, they do still exist. But Gerard Batten, who was a very, very nice guy, very sensible chap, he unfortunately cozied up to Tommy Robinson, and Tommy Robinson is. I've got a lot of time for Tommy. I think he's absolutely great, but unfortunately, he's been so heavily smeared.
Yeah.
As to no matter how often he has a shower, he still stinks.
Yeah, and that is the problem. I haven't seen. I knew Gerard really well at that time, and did a fair bit of work with him. And he was a lovely guy, great to have a pint with, and very experienced, very kind of set on where his party should go. But I haven't seen him for a couple of years. But that clearly was something that spooked a lot of people, including many of the members and the MEPs of that party, because they formed a new one.
Yeah, it did. But the thing about Tommy, and I love him or hate him, all he has ever said is, this is how Islam operates. This is how it operates in Luton, where he grew up. And he's quite, he's got friends of all shapes, sizes and hues. And his problem, and everyone's problem, should be not with the sensible ones, but with the headbangers. Look at Munich.
And these are the problems, right? These are the troubles he has. I mean, I've mentioned this before. I'm sure you've seen it, Kevin. The Oxford speech he gave some years ago. He was a bit younger at the time, and telling his backstory and his upbringing and the relevance as to why he built a belief system around this. And it's really mesmerising. I think it's the greatest thing I think he's done in that respect. I think there's a lot of perhaps going off the rails in other areas that don't quite work for me. And there is a backstory that is sadly irredeemable. And there's the problem, as you rightly say. You're not going to... You take a shower in that direction, you may pay a price. Listen, Kevin, I've got to move for no other reason than we've got a little break coming up, and we've got to fit our next feature in as well. Thank you to Kevin in Portsmouth. I'm grateful to Graham. That's Reform UK, Graham, who says, we need to go VAR. I messaged that it was Norman Tebbit on Wednesday. This is the voice of doom. But here's the thing. I don't know where you messaged it. Well, it looks like he sent it to, 87222. You see, you've got Adam, who is overseeing this. And maybe Adam is ignoring stuff. The trouble is there's a flurry of them come through at the same time. There could be hundreds come through, and it's finding all of the answers. Obviously, if there was a big prize we were giving away, I would be going round to Graham's house with a brand new car or whatever he would have won. But Graham, you were spot on, even if we didn't get it at the time. 0344 499 1000. Kaz says, couldn't live without YouTube now. I can look up how to fix the car or how to learn how to do something. It does save your bacon a little bit. I've looked up several. You do. The trouble with that, you often have to go through, when you watch somebody's video of how to do something and they spend 7 minutes doing anything but the telling you to do bit. It's like, I don't need all that. Unpacking the box, I don't want you to unpack the Hoover. I just want you to tell me how to unclog it. I don't need to watch you unboxing it and admiring its new tube. That doesn't do it. But broadly speaking, it is rather useful, and it's the way a lot of places do business, including here. 0344 499 1000. It's 3:30. This is Talk. Will Guyatt joins us on the other side of the break to talk tech, and boy, there are some amazing tech stories out there today. All of that and more coming up next.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Indeed, 25 to 4 as well. Boy, there's a lot going on here. JD Vance, by the way, is in he's in Munich, I think, isn't he? As meeting sort of European counterparts and various other characters. Apparently, he's giving both barrels at this meeting in all manner of different ways. Brexit gets a mention. We'll bring you the headlines of that shortly because it's rather interesting. But it's a security conference they're meeting at, and Vance has pulled no punches. Will Guyot is with us, Talk's tech correspondent. Afternoon to you, Will.
Hello, Ian. How are you today?
I'm all right. Happy anniversary for 20 years of YouTube.
I thought you were going to wish me a Valentine's Day surprise then. I was wondering where we were going there.
Well,
but yeah, happy birthday to YouTube.
20 years of YouTube. Boy, it's changed in that time. Did it start? I can't remember this. I also can't remember when I first saw it, which is a bit disappointing because I'd love to be able to go, oh, yes, I tried to look up that little cameo I had in the bill many years ago or something like that. But 20 years ago, it began. Did it start like Amazon started flogging books? Did YouTube start with a different purpose than the one it has now?
No, it was created for people to upload video, and the first video that went up there was a video of people going to the zoo. Now, bizarrely, even though today is the 20th anniversary of YouTube, the first video wasn't uploaded until April. So the YouTube.com was registered 20 years ago today. They were working on it behind the scenes. It was a couple of PayPal engineers, PayPal, the payment service. Now, Elon Musk was there, all sorts of other people were there in the early days, and it was some engineers from there.
They were in a small office above a pizza shop, right?
Pretty much, yep, that's absolutely correct. And within a year and a half, or less than a year and a half from launching it, it got acquired by Google for $1.5 billion in Google stock. So those founders, if they'd held on to a fair chunk of that Google stock from 2006 when they sold up, they'd be doing pretty well right now. But
I'm sure they're doing all right anyway after that, right?
Yeah, they've all been into various other tech companies. Some of them ended up at Google Ventures. They've been all over the place. But intriguingly, you're right. You can pretty much find anything now on YouTube. And there's around, I think it's about 4 billion videos now on the platform, including the appearance of you in that vintage Doctor Who export as a hemivore. You can find that online.
Yes.
But funnily enough, somebody else has also uploaded the clip of you being interviewed about being a hemivore. So you can find
is that
too.
online? That formed part of the Blu-ray DVD box set for Christmas only a couple of years ago.
Well, somebody might be going around and knocking on the door of the person that uploaded that particular video of I've just ratted them out. But yeah, it is available there, so you can see Ian Collins of a few more than a few years ago now.
I also found the other day a little very tiny extra role in the French and Saunders Christmas special. I found on there.
This is new. I've known you for many years, and I was not aware that you were in the. What was your role in that? Smoking individually.
It was a kind of. It was a sort of Gone with the Wind parody. That I don't think, for many reasons, that they would get away with these days. There was a few. I mean, they were meant to be stereotyping to make the parody, as it were. I think I was some kind of bellboy with a funny hat standing behind Jennifer Saunders as they brought in the Christmas turkey, and the Christmas turkey was about like 10 foot long, and it was that kind of sort of pantomime-y parody of a famous film, Gone with the Wind moment. It was good fun. I really remember doing it. Was a day's work, and it was great.
All of you hemivores standing around in a churchyard smoking is one of my favourite bits of that behind the scenes. You wouldn't see that in a behind the scenes feature these days.
I haven't even watched the behind the scenes thing. Is that right? People having a cigarette?
Yeah. Most of you on the Marlboro Reds or whatever the.
I don't even know if I was smoking them, but I do remember Nicholas Parsons, the actor who was in that episode, saying to me, "Can you do anything with that mask on?" And I didn't know why he was asking me.
What was he asking you that question for?
Yes, exactly. Very interesting. Can I ask you a couple of trivia questions about YouTube? You may or may not know the answers. How many monthly users, roughly?
A couple of billion now on YouTube. It's a huge number.
All right. Most viewed video on YouTube, do you know?
That's a good question. Can't remember off the top of my head. No.
I'm going to say Baby Shark Dance.
Probably is one of them, but there
Okay.
are a number of videos now with over 1 billion views on them.
That's true. Most subscribed YouTuber. Who is that?
It used to be PewDiePie. I don't know who it is. Is it Mr. Beast at the moment?
It is Mr. Beast, yeah. And if you haven't, have you been watching Beast Games? I think it's on Prime.
I have, yeah.
Oh, man, I like. How good is that?
It is good fun, and that just shows you the power of...
Forget traitors and all that. Beast Games is where it's at. Oh, boy, that's superb. There is another anniversary today as well. 30 years since Talk Radio began.
Really?
Yeah, it's 30 years ago today, in its original form. You know, then sort of it morphed from Talk Radio to Talk Sport. I wasn't there on day one, but I was there on week 6
I remember
or something.
all the characters, Tommy Boyd, Caesar the Geezer, all sorts of great people back in the days who
I'd use the word great very loosely in some of those, but yeah, you're right about Tommy. It was a curious time, and I remember somebody saying back then, who was it that said it? Might have been Scott Chisholm. Remember Big Scott?
Yeah.
Saying to me he said in 25 years' time, because Talk Radio was the first speech commercial station, national station. Nothing like that had ever happened before, and it was on medium wave at the time, of course. So there was no digital world, there was no YouTube or anything like that. I remember saying, in 25 years' time, there'll be 50 of these stations around. It'll be just like America, where they've got these talk stations everywhere. And as we move 30 years forward, there's still only one. There's still only...
You know,
well, there might be a couple, but it's only a couple.
Big Scott is still delivering knowledge like that from his year in Devon. I spoke to him not too long ago.
Yeah, he is. There you go. Let's talk about AI. The biggest shift in our lifetime, says the Google boss, Will. He's not wrong.
Yeah, this came from the AI conference earlier this week, and this stuff moves so quickly now. This feels like it's about 12 weeks ago in my brain, and this is when everybody got together for the third of these conferences in France this time round. The first one was in the UK, second one was in South Korea, third one was in France. And, you know, like a year and a bit ago, the UK was going to be right at the front of trust and ethics in AI. And Rishi Sunak was standing up there saying...
Yeah, talks about it a lot.
We're not doing it anymore because we didn't sign the trust and ethics the trust and ethics treaty that came out of that particular conference. Right. Us in the US decided it wasn't for us. And your old man JD Vance was there, and he felt that being too close to trust and ethics and being safe with AI was going to be putting the handbrake on it and stopping it from really thriving and delivering. So we find ourselves in an interesting position here, where the US have decided that the rules don't apply and they think it can become more successful and AI could be used to turbocharge more parts of the US society if they don't have to worry about trust and ethics.
I know that, I mean, people who say that generally don't really know how AI would be applied or to what end. They just kind of say it like almost as if you are trying to put, hard and fast rules on progress. But AI has to be sort of treated with kind of metaphoric oven gloves in a way because of its possible capabilities. I now find myself, I'm sure you do too, Will, if I see something on social media, here's a leader, here's Macron making a speech or here's Trump making a speech, I have to double, triple check it to make sure it's them because I don't know if it is. Is this AI? Is it somebody who's manufactured or edited the video to create a voice? That might not be AI, it could just be clever video editing, but we know there is a problem there.
That's so true. And this week after the Super Bowl and Kanye West trying to sell T-shirts with a swastika on them and proclaiming he's a Nazi on X before getting banned from the platform. For a moment, lots of people thought that was actually a deep fake or an AI-generated deepfake, rather than Kanye West having an absolute meltdown.
I didn't even know that story, Will. That's fascinating. I thought you were going to tell me that's a good example of deepfake, but apparently it wasn't.
No, and the same week though, Ian, on the back of that, a video came out with loads of prominent Jewish celebrities with white T-shirts on, basically giving the middle finger to Kanye West. And Scarlett Johansson, the actress, came out and said AI is the biggest threat to humanity because this video, including her, Mark Zuckerberg, Steven Spielberg, all loads and loads of big stars, Sacha Baron Cohen, etc. None of them even made the film. They it was
Wow.
an AI-generated film. And at one moment in that film, Ian, the only way you find out it's fake, suddenly, randomly, half a second into a frame, Mark Zuckerberg develops a sick finger on his left hand. And that's the God's honest truth about how you can
So the bit that you thought
intelligence generated.
So an objective onlooker, the bit that you thought is probably AI wasn't, and the bit that you thought wasn't AI was.
Yeah.
Which is kind of bonkers.
Yeah, and this is how quickly this stuff is moving. You and I have talked about tech and artificial intelligence now for a long time, but we're getting to a point now where we're not far off something being launched and everybody being absolutely bamboozled by it and being convinced it's real. We really are probably weeks or months off of that actually happening. It's the next iteration of whatever the chatbot or large language model is, and we're probably at a stage where these characters aren't suddenly looking slightly, a body slightly looking unusual or an extra finger appearing on a hand. It's going to look like the real person.
Indeed, but it should be said, of course, that's just the, if you like, the public face of AI, people mucking around with visuals and words. AI as a technology can be applied to all sorts of areas of engineering and other things, medicine. So yes, that gets the headlines. Oh, look, it wasn't really Scarlett Johansson, or it was really Kanye West. But actually, the bigger story isn't that. I mean, that's important, and it's going to be crucial to people getting the truth, and fake news versus real news, and mainstream media versus all of that. But the other stuff is where the real movement or progress of the planet will happen, right?
Yeah, and to me now, the most frustrating thing is we don't hear enough of that. There's, lots of, for example, we had the ethics conference in France this week, and everybody talked about the fact Elon Musk had suddenly put in a ridiculous and totally spurious bid to buy OpenAI for $97.4 billion, which he cancelled the following day. But that was thrown in there to take people's focus away from what was meant to be discussed at the event. And there was 5,000 AI experts there, not just political leaders.
Wow.
And next time another of these things happens, I want to hear some of those examples, the breast cancer detection improving massively, it being used for, all sorts of admin purposes to reduce waiting lists and those kind of things. Lots of real world examples of stuff now happening and companies now developing stuff really quickly. There's some brilliant examples of stuff going on in the world of AI.
How to print your own Volvo XC90 from your bedroom. That's what I want to see. Listen, Will, stay with us. We've got more to come. We'll also catch up on what JD Vance has been saying in Munich. This is Talk. The time now just gone 4:45.
And most of the time, I was asking her questions. That's what I was doing. And that was because I wanted to hold her to account, and I wanted to know whether or not she would be able to answer my questions. And what I discovered was that when she did answer my questions, she gave me platitudes. She did not give me real answers. She was unable to name a single school of the top nearly 100 schools that have had more than +1 on their progress. She hasn't been to visit a single one.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
10 to 4, Will Guyatt is with us. We're talking tech. Oh, by the way, Will, TikTok is back, right? TikTok was going to be banned. It was going to be person non grata. But now that's all changed. What's the story briefly on this one, Will?
Yeah, it got taken off of the app stores in the US when we were going through the fact it was going to be banned, and all US political parties decided it was being banned and then decided it wasn't going to be banned. But then there was a law in place and they still had to ban it. And that's as a result of that. That's all kind of unfolded now. It's been kicked down the can. I think it's 90 days. And we're going to make it. Trump's got to make a decision as to whether it's being sold. He wants it sold to a US company, or whether it's going to go through this whole process and get shut down again.
Maybe Elon will buy it.
No, he said he won't. He said he's not buying it. He's ruled out. He's too busy, apparently.
Yeah, well, he's got bigger fish to fry over there, apparently. China launching the centre to train 100+ humanoid robots simultaneously. That's a sentence. What's the story here, Will?
Yeah, it's going to capture a lot of attention, but this is definitely PR purposes, PR smush. The idea that they're going to bring a load of humanoid robots together and train them for the future of work and life in China. It's more of a place, Ian, to showcase some of the stuff that they're doing there in the country. And you and I haven't spoken for the last couple of weeks, but the big thing here is AI, the Western version of AI, which is expensive, uses tons of energy, and is kind of you need the highest quality kit to do it, is being put to the test slightly by China. It's like we've been running it on Ferraris for years, and they've snuck through with it on lawnmowers, and those lawnmowers are carefully tuned, and they're doing it for a much cheaper, quicker and easier route into artificial intelligence and robotics. So it's going to be interesting to see whether or not the kind of really powerful chips and processors from the West, or what they're doing in China, are going to win.
And in terms of the robot side, because we were just talking in the last section of artificial intelligence, and we've talked for a long time, Will, about years, in fact, the progress of robots. Yes, indeed, the progress of robots and what they now look like and what they can do. But we are really and seriously in very different territory now.
Yeah, this stuff is real. It's not all sort of jokey scenarios, and there are these humanoid robots have gone from looking like they're kind of walking John Wayne-esque down the corridor after they've been to the toilet, to being something far more realistic and able to walk. You and I have been watching those Boston Dynamics videos on X for many years, and the robots are getting better, and you can literally, there's videos of humans hitting them over the head with a plank of wood and the robot getting back up within seconds. So this stuff is getting more advanced really quickly.
Indeed. And Kath says, reference the old talk radio, because we started talking about anniversaries. I remember it well. I phoned in once and spoke to the late, great Mike Dickin. I was brave then. My health is not in question. And of course, Mike wasn't there. Mike kind of joined, I can't remember how many years down the line it was before Mike joined. But he was an incredible addition, because he had a very, good backstory in speech broadcasting. Peter Dealey, do you remember Peter and all of those characters that were, they'd been doing it for years, these guys. Interesting times somehow, and I don't know how, As Ferrari always says, whenever the axe swings, I'm always bending down, picking up a paperclip. For some reason, I managed to avoid it and hung around in different forms. I had a little exit and then a return, but, you know, who cares? Will, it's been brilliant. Thank you. We'll speak again next week. Will Guyatt with us here on Talk. Let me bring you that JD Vance story then. This is new Vice President JD Vance spared no prisoners as he delivered his landmark address to the Munich Security Conference. This man doesn't hang around. The summit was intended to focus on European security and how to end the war in Ukraine, but Mr Vance criticised Europe over mass immigration and condemned the UK for betraying Brexit voters. Let's have a listen to what he's been saying.
No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. But you know what they did vote for? In England, they voted for Brexit, and agree or disagree, they voted for it. And more all over Europe, they're voting for political leaders who promise to put an end to out-of-control migration. Now, I happen to agree with a lot of these concerns, but you don't have to agree with me. I just think that people care about their homes, they care about their dreams, they care about their safety and their capacity to provide for themselves and their children. And they're smart.
Yeah, if I was going to make one comment, it's the UK, not England, Mr Vance. I mean, there is a distinction to be made there, I would hope, as Vice President. Somebody might have whispered. I know it's a classic American blunder, but there it is. I mean, he's going to get a lot of support for this stuff. That free speech is under threat, he says, in Britain and Europe. He criticised Europe for weak defence spending and failing to address mass immigration, as you heard there. He claimed the biggest threat to Europe is internal, not from Russia or from China. I think that's a fascinating line to... it's the weekend now. I wish we were debating this tomorrow on the programme. He argued that European leaders are betraying Brexit voters by allowing unvetted immigration. He tied the recent terror attack in Munich to Europe's failure to control migration, and he believes core values like free speech, national sovereignty and cultural preservation are being eroded. And he concluded by suggesting that if American democracy can endure Greta Thunberg's activism, Europe can handle Elon Musk's influence. That's a brilliant line. I mean, fair play to Mr Vance. I love that. So there it is. I mean, that's the position of the Vice President. I think he will be mostly endorsed for that. Peter Cardwell's with us shortly. Before we do, it's another reminder, and you don't want to be missing out on this time to find out how you could be in with a chance to win £25,000.
It's competition time, and we're giving you a chance to win a whopping £25,000. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
It's almost the weekend, but not for this man, who has his weekend kind of at the beginning of the week.
That's right, Mondays and Tuesdays.
Peter Cardwell is here. It's going to be, I tell you what, whatever you were going to be talking about before...
Yep, it's now JD Vance.
This happens in radio. You put a show together, you spend hours putting it together, and then suddenly there's a bit of breaking news, and you go, right, all of that scrapped. All the guests, you might have booked 7 or 8 guests, they're all gone. There's a new kid in town, and it's the JD Vance story, because... this is very powerful stuff.
It certainly is. We changed our running order, ripped it up, and that's what you've got to do, because this is a huge story. It's really important. JD Vance's words, the American Vice President, talking about free speech, democracy, wokeness. I don't think he said that word, but certainly that's what he's talking about. He's talking about people not being able to do what they want to do, what their freedoms allow them to do. Praying near an abortion clinic, for example, is something we talked about. We're going to play a big, long clip of what he said. He didn't just talk about the UK. He took aim at Sweden, France, lots of other places as well. But this is the #1 story for us today on Drive, and we'll make sure we get as many viewers and listeners' comments on it as well.
I mean, I've said this already, Peter. He did make one little... it's a very much an American error by calling the UK England.
Yes, often happens.
Which, you know, if you're in Northern Ireland, for example, or Wales...